Yeah, I don't know about that either.
She's like dissolving off with water.
Well, yeah, a couple of the proteins, and then it's kind of like with beans where you sprout
That's what I
them
was thinking.
and you break down that shell that surrounds the meat of the nut, basically. You know, the soft part on the inside.
You're soaking it. You can see the fiber.
Yeah.
Like the foamy stuff, kind of like when a bean soaks.
It's very. You can see it, and I pour that off.
Yeah.
So when I dry them on dry, there's nothing like that on there.
There might also be some some sugars in there that are harder to digest.
Yeah, soaking's probably beneficial for you for everything.
I see you got the FODMAPs on there. I did FODMAPs last year for like literally 6 months in a row, and it was trying to fight SIBO, and that was one of the toughest things I've ever done.
What is SIBO?
Small intestinal bacteria.
Oh, we're going to talk about it.
I know. I'm like, hearing all these terms, I'm like, I'm just a chef. I don't know.
Bloating after carbohydrates and after meals and being full before you finish your
Can I
meal.
steal one of your pens? You have two.
Yeah. Mainly bloating and inflammation.
I think I can cut off this beginning part.
No one
FODMAP
popped on
can
there
be
yet.
a way
I'm
to
expecting
really
at
help
least.
the gut. So FODMAPs
Let's
are
see.
like
I might send a text and then
two different.
make sure.
So this is happening. What are you using for now?
I use it for the telehealth, like when people are sick and I'm checking in. And so I pay for the group one, so you could have more than one
that's what
person
I'm
on
thinking
because
about
of
doing.
yoga too.
Cool.
Because like with the old space, the space was so small, and if people wanted to pop on, especially people that live 45 minutes away, they could see me. I think I do need a microphone for yoga where they can hear everything I'm saying, because if I'm in down dog and the computer's over there, it's harder to hear what I'm saying. And it's beginner's yoga, so I'm still doing everything. I'm not just like, standing there talking.
And now you all do
And
that.
I do this, and everyone's like, "That's a Sanskrit word she is."
No idea what that is.
Right. So I'm trying to make sure I close it.
Is this the one that's like $40 a month?
But I did it in a way.
I have to go back and look because I paid for. I think I paid for the whole year.
Yeah, I'd be interested because I'm thinking about it.
And I'm sure the receipt or the thing is somewhere in my.
Everything I did. So fasting shoes, bone broth, probably not that day. Staying away from some things that are kind of, doing an elimination diet, I think, is huge. And it's just getting some of the bacteria, beating that down, killing those, healing the gut, reintroducing healthy foods, probiotics, and but you got to do it slow. You got to, it's hard work, but it pays off for me. I agree 100%. It definitely paid off. And I'm still working through stuff with my gut. Like if I'm not like, used to have to be super vigilant about not having like gluten in milk and things like that. But the only time it flares up now is if I have those things for a couple of days.
You can have a meal.
Yeah, and that's how everybody. I mean, you got to put in the hard work. And it might be, anywhere from 3 to 6 months, even a year. But once your body starts giving the signs that it's time to bring, and you're always trying, because what works right now might not work in 6 months, and so you're always just trying some things, bringing some things back in, see how you respond, and sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but eventually you get out of the woods and.
It's not a one size fits all.
No. Everybody's very.
Because I have a great chiropractor, and he does these seminars on food.
Yeah.
And he did this 21-day challenge, and it was pretty tough. But then now he's changed his mind on that, and he's gone to something else. So it's like that didn't work for me because I might have lost. It was a 21-day challenge where he gave you recipes and this day you have this and this day.
So you followed an exact regimented thing that you did every day.
Yes. And some people lose 15 pounds, but you gain it right back when you go back to.
Absolutely.
You can't live that way.
Nope.
You have to figure out. You have to live. It's a real world.
That's what I do. Is everybody's so different, and there might be the same options on the table, but. Everybody's different, and what works for you. You just got to figure out what works for you long term.
Yeah, and I think, like he said, it's about it is kind of retraining your body in a simplistic way. Like I never did elimination diets or anything, but I never had any medical issues that I had to resolve. But just starting to do this and doing it habitually has changed the way I eat so much. Like I had pizza last night for the first time in a while, and I didn't enjoy it at all, and it made me feel bad. And I was like, I don't like pizza anymore. Who am I?
Yeah. That way. I've been off sugar.
Yeah. But you have to see
it's so good. And I ate a piece of candy the other day. Next day, I was in chronic pain from my disease. I felt horrible. Like, it's not worth the pain.
No, it's not.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think seeing
That's
how
a
you
major
feel
connection.
when you're eating clean, to me, that's like what I can always return to.
Yes.
Like, I know how I feel when I'm doing it the right way, so for
Right.
me, it's kind of a no-brainer now.
Mhm.
But it does take a lot of work. It took years for
But
me.
everybody around me eats bad.
Yes, and that's a really
Oh,
important
yeah.
thing, too.
Yeah, that's everybody.
My husband is
Yeah, that's
he's
everything.
nasty.
Oh, it's hard. It's hard if it's in the
It's
same
so
house
bad.
as you two.
Yeah.
But you'd be amazed how people learn by example, too. My
Oh, yeah.
husband's cleaned up his eating a lot just because I do it.
I'm the guy that's gonna bring a lunchbox to lunch.
Yep.
It'd be weird.
Be that rude
Embrace
person.
it.
Yep.
Embrace it. Don't hide it, man.
Oh.
Should shine your light. But other people, they do see how well you're doing eventually, and
Yep.
they want some too. So
Mhm.
I can't tell you, like, as soon as I started launching my health coaching business and getting healthy and putting some of that stuff online, and all my fraternity brothers from college were like, "Hey, man, what are you doing?"
Yeah.
Katie's,
I'm amazed at what people can do and eat and walk around
I
okay.
know.
But then I find when I start to talk to people, they're not okay.
Yeah.
That's
And
true.
and I don't know if it's because of what I do, that I'm always looking for people like that I could help or have an illness, or but it's
I think
everybody.
you don't realize, like, I used to, my stomach always felt weird, and like going to the bathroom wasn't always great. And now I'm like, oh, that was like not all good stuff. I just thought it was normal. I think you become like, you realize
Yeah.
that.
It's your normal.
Oh, it's
Yes.
like my friends will have like a guys' weekend. They'll be like, "Oh man, I'm so bloated. I haven't went to the bathroom in 3 days. I'm feeling like crap. So get some pizza and some beers." And I'm like,
Exactly.
"Your gut's messed up, man. Like, let's talk about that." You know? But,
Let's fast while we
That
talk.
sounds good.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's me. Here, have a plate of nothing.
Well, I'm gonna start talking, and I think that
Are we
one
recording?
person coming. I am recording. I'll cut out that beginning part, but I'm not sure where.
Oh, our discussions.
Yeah, right. So.
Yeah, I was wondering about the best place for that.
I mean, feel free to move it.
Yeah, and let me turn the
Um,
screen over too.
The first thing I want to do before we start is tell you a little bit about my journey, because I like to be an example of how you can get there, but I am human too, and you guys were already sharing your journeys. So when I was 17, I kept getting ovarian cysts, and the doctors kept saying, well, the only thing we can do is go in and operate, and we're going to take both of your ovaries. And I was pretty stubborn, and I turned 18 kind of in the interim of when they wanted to do surgery, because I had this 111 centimeter cyst. And I said no to the surgery, and then got on a mailing list, right, because this is really before like people were doing stuff on the internet. And every month I got a newsletter on eating healthy to try to cure polycystic ovarian syndrome, which was what I'd been diagnosed with. Later in college, though, I was also diagnosed with IBS, and I saw this amazing gynecologist who was better than any GI doctor I'd ever seen. And he said to me, you know, Kate, your boss, I was doing undergraduate research and I was teaching assistant and trying to do, you know, live my life, but also work. And he said, your boss is causing your IBS because you're so stressed.
Yeah.
And you drink too much caffeine, and that's really interfering with your digestion. So this was a GYN saying that to me.
It's awesome.
But the fact that he took a minute to like listen to my whole story, it was like, I actually think you've cured your cysts. Your pain is coming from something different, because, you know, it's all kind of down here, so it's hard to discern. So at that time, you know, my diet was what we would call pretty much SAD, standard American diet. So cornbread, bagels and cream cheese. I was from New Jersey, so I had bagels and cream cheese sometimes 3 times a day.
Oh my God.
Beer, more cornbread. Then I moved to the South, so I incorporated all the Southern carbs in with the Northern carbs. There wasn't much protein, and there were 0 greens. And so my ability to detox, I also genetically have thyroid antibodies, which weren't discovered till later after my son was born, but I had them a long time without anyone discovering them. And so genetically, when you have some autoimmune issues, like Sjogren's or psoriasis or anything, if there's a long list of autoimmune, it is harder to detox sometimes. So without those greens, I wasn't really getting a lot of the toxins out of my system. But I was also limited in, first of all, I didn't know how to cook. I had no idea. I told Laura this. I called my mom one day, sophomore year of college, when I'd moved out of the dorm, and said, how do you make a potato? And she was like, how would you like to make the potato? She's like, you could boil it, bake it, put it in the microwave. She's like, there's lots of different ways. You can slice it up. I was like, oh, well, what should I do? She's like, what would you like it to taste like? She's like, did you never watch me cook? You know, and my mom did the best she could, kind of coming from her background. We did eat a decent amount of protein, and she was all about, because we were always playing sports, so she was all about the protein. She had three daughters. She was trying to push the protein, but we definitely did too much dairy and too much carbs. And I ate peanut butter and jelly sandwich every single day. You know, so go figure. Now I can't eat peanut butter. I think I used up all my. Maybe one day I'll get back to it, but then from there, like throughout PA school, I was that person in PA school that brought my greens and my soup and sometimes salad if I was feeling like I could digest salad. And I always had my food with me, because I found that especially if I was stressed and studying, then my instinct was to go buy carbs and go buy the pizza or go buy the like macaroni and cheese with a brownie. That would have been my choice if I was stressed out. And PA school is kind of like 2 years of stress of trying to get through it. So, but people would come up and ask me in PA school, like, hey, you only are going to the gym once or twice a week, and we're sitting in class for 10 hours a day. How come you're not gaining weight and the rest of us are? And I was like, well, I'm eating like 8 vegetables a day. So just start there. Don't even cut stuff out. Just try to eat more vegetables, and you'll be surprised. So, and then when my son was born, he's 7 now, but he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at age 1. And I refused to hear that we didn't know why. Everyone kept saying, it's not your fault, and we don't know why. And type 1 diabetes is also autoimmune, but we don't know what causes it. And to me, it seemed like we had so much information. Even back when I've been diagnosed with PCOS, I found that one doctor who was mailing out a newsletter. I'm like, there has to be one doctor, chiropractor, somebody somewhere in this country understands autoimmune, or maybe in Europe they understand what caused it. And so I just started digging into it. And at that point forward, it was hard for me to go back working into regular medicine once I realized we actually did know that the gut was at the root of almost all autoimmune disease. And we weren't telling patients that in the regular clinic. We were just trying to give them medicines that would help with the symptoms, but we weren't ever trying to get to the root cause. So my daughter was born 2 years after my son, and she pretty much had celiac from birth. So to me, what that told me was I needed to work on my gut, right? Because how do I have this baby that cannot, even when I eat the gluten and then breastfeed her, she is like a different person. She's got blood in her stool. I kept asking pediatricians about blood in the stool for every bowel movement. They're like, oh, it's normal. I was like, no, you don't understand. My child's bleeding internally. This is not normal, So my own sort of path then became, I got to heal my gut. And at the same time I'm doing this, my husband has autoimmune. Everybody in the house is going to do it with me. And so we started then down GAPS diet first, which we'll get to in a minute, and FODMAP, and mainly paleo. At this point, we don't do any gluten, dairy, soy, or corn in our home, because those are the top 4 that really bother the most people in my family. But it's been a give and take, and it's February, it's the middle of the winter now. I'm realizing that we need to reset. Like, I'm like, some things have snuck in, like even just gluten-free products that I would never normally buy have kind of snuck into our house. And sometimes gluten-free products are much less healthy than the gluten version, because there's so much more sugar and junk in it. And so anyway, so I did want to mention that the root cause of the disease is what functional medicine is. We're changing our clinic from Restoring Balance Family Practice to the Functional Medicine Center, because I would like people who join from the get-go to understand that we're going to work really hard to try to get to the root cause of what's going on with them. And even if you just want to come in once a year for a well visit, that is totally acceptable, but there are little signs I'm looking for that I'm going to tell you the root cause of, whether it's like what your nails look like, can tell me what your nutrition is. For me, like, I've been dealing with mold illness since we moved out of the old place. My hands were red in the palms, and I had a vasculitis. So I'm explaining that to patients if I see it on them, trying to do that really good full physical sometimes. Yeah.
I used to get that.
Yeah. I have a patient that came in with Raynaud's, and she said, no one's ever been able to tell me what the Raynaud's is from. And I'm like, well, gut health, probably in her case, some mold exposure, but we'll get to that too. So, certainly toxins cause inflammation in the gut. So think of it this way: if you have like a garden hose and the intestine's like the garden hose, right? Its job is to eliminate stool. And we're afraid in society to talk about this a lot, but I see sometimes even 6-month-olds or 8-month-olds that are not having a good poop every day, and that's a conversation that we really need to quickly get to. And same thing with 40-year-old, 50-year-old, 60-year-old patients that they come in and I'm like, I need to hear about what your poop is like. And I realize that other people are not talking to them about this. So even like we've got a squatty potty in the bathroom upstairs, and that just helps because you kind of bring your knees up and that puts the colon in a better place. If you cannot completely eliminate the toxins every single day, you're missing out on some health, right? At the very, very minimum, you're missing out on feeling like you've got energy and that you've gotten rid of those toxins. There's a big difference when you notice how you feel between having a really good poop and not having a really good poop. So I learned a lot of that. There was a patient I had when I used to work infectious disease in the hospital, and he was a paraplegic, and he told me he got a pressure right here before he had to move his bowel. And I was like, that happens to me, but I never met anyone that happened to. He's like, well, I think I'm really in tune with it because I can't feel down here. But he's like, I don't have any accidents. Like I get to the bathroom and like, wow, I wonder if we could talk to people more about that, about like feeling what else is going on when you need to go have a bowel movement, because your whole body is kind of like trying to get ready to get rid of these toxins, and that's the point of it, right? And then our environment is toxic. I mean, the truth is our country, our air, everything about right now is very different than 50 years ago. And not that there weren't toxins then, but we don't necessarily have long-term studies of like what these toxins do to people. We know, and one of the things I'm doing is like this online master's degree in functional medicine. One of the biggest things is the pesticides and the air pollution. So like I used to go running on busy roads where there was a ton of cars, and that was a really big insult to my gut because I was inhaling all of that air pollution. And what happens is your liver and your gut are so important. Your liver gets backed up. So your liver is almost like supposed to be filtering the toxins out of the blood, getting it into the stool. And if your liver's getting bombarded by all sides by toxins, or you get something like Lyme disease on top of what's already going on, then your gut can no longer do its job. So liver and gut are the basis of all of really functional and integrative medicine. And Rachel, our herbalist next week, will talk more about that too. But I just wanted to mention that like our environment's toxic. High fructose corn syrup is a toxin. It's a known toxin. Mold creates like 20,000 toxins. A lot of them are the cause of infertility in this country, and that is known. I'm not just saying these things because I feel like they might be true. There's study after study on this, and especially like in the last year, North Carolina had like the rainiest year ever. A lot of people are being exposed to the mold toxins. Can you guys think of other big toxins? I mean, BPA, plastics.
Oh yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Metals.
Sometimes you get home from the grocery store, and if you look at all your stuff, it's all wrapped in plastic.
Mm-hmm.
Heavy metals. I've seen a few people with really high lead. It's not because they're licking the paint. It's because lead is carried through the placenta, yes. And they were never detoxed. So their great-grandmother had lead. Yep. Their grandmother had lead. Their mother had lead. The problem with heavy metals is it really needs to be the final step. We need your gut to be pretty healthy before we can really get the heavy metals out. So there are quite a few things we have to do first, and that's not what people want to hear when I talk to them about heavy metals, because they're like, wow, let's get this out now. So, yeah, I went to a conference on IV therapy, and a lot of it ended up being about mold. It was like supposed to be about how to give IV vitamin C and stuff, but we ended up talking a ton about mold. One of the presenters stood in front of 500 doctors and PAs and nurse practitioners and said, okay, so high fructose corn syrup is a toxin. Everyone here knows that, right? Like, and people in the audience, some people were like, what? Like, because they're there trying to learn how to fix people with medicine, but one of the first things we could do is actually fix people with lifestyle. And could you avoid high fructose corn syrup for 1 month? Could you just challenge yourself to do that? So, and then of course allergens, cockroaches, sadly, we're all pretty much reacting to. A lot of dusts we're reacting to, trees, grasses. Lawns may be one of the worst things for a lot of our health, not just allergen-wise, because so many of us are allergic to grass, but also just from the standpoint of we're killing all the insects, and we actually need the insects, it turns out. So,
like Roundup.
Yeah. People want their lawn to look green, so what do? Give themselves literally kidney cancer by spraying their lawn. I mean, my dad worked on a farm in New Jersey for years, and he ended up with renal cell cancer. he's like, because I was breathing all that stuff in. And then of course microbes. So if you have a bad bacteria growing in your gut, or a prion, which is smaller than a virus, it's really tiny, like mad cow disease is a prion. Those are dangerous because they're so small, they're really hard to find. Parasites, most of us are walking around with parasites, but our immune system does a really good job of keeping them, you know, down, keeping them kind of like beaten down, and then something happens to us.
Are
like
some good, of course.
some are good,
Yeah.
sure, but things like helminths, like I find a lot of helminths. If I send people's stool to a vet, they will be able to find it. Whereas
And
a
I've
human
heard
lab,
of helmet.
yeah.
I've had to do helmet therapy
Yeah.
from Germany.
Sometimes it's better if you just go ahead and do like a few weeks of a parasite cleanse every year, just because.
Yeah.
But our immune system is supposed to be able to handle it. I just think because of our type A personality, our stress, our go lifestyle in this country, we are not fighting off the bad parasites like we should be. Giardia is also considered a parasite, but I think I might have been telling you this, but like the guy who founded Patagonia is a really interesting, really healthy guy. And he wrote a book all about his company, but also about his travels. And he said, you know, he would drink water from a stream a little bit at a time for many, many years until he found that his gut was able to handle Giardia. Giardia is one of the most common bugs that's living in like freshwater streams.
Wow.
And he thinks that we kind of overdo it by trying to get everything out instead of getting our immune system to work with us.
I like that.
Same thing with hand sanitizers, right? Like we're trying to kill all the germs. And that's why I like that book, Eat Dirt, which I'll show you guys. Microbes, we talked about stress for sure. Think about it this way. If you're going to digest dinner, and in that hour or two, or maybe even 3, because I'm having like low motility myself right now, if you're trying to digest dinner, and in that time period, you're doing work that maybe is a little bit stressful, you're having an upsetting conversation with a spouse or, you know, a family member or something, or your fight or flight turns on when you're stressed, and your rest and digest turns off. So you get food boluses that sit there, literally, and they ferment. And we do not want our food to ferment and cause bloating and gas. And obviously that's not a great idea. So what can we do to turn on parasympathetic hormone? Well, Rachel will talk about this next week too, but we shouldn't eat and drive. We should chew.
Mm-hmm.
And if we all stopped eating and driving and actually chewed, probably 2 of those, right? Put our screen away while we're eating, that kind of stuff.
Multitasking.
Yeah. Right, multitasking is a fallacy. It's not really happening.
Yeah.
And then
So
I already
true.
mentioned standard American diet, and the fact that I'm pretty impressed with how people can be putting that in their body and still functioning. I think they don't realize how good they could feel. The next slide was just what's to come. So I'm not going to read those. But basically, yeah, the small intestine is at least, you know, I think that's an average 23 feet long. Large intestine is so called because it's wider. So what happens is you have stomach, duodenum, jejunum, ileum, and then at the bottom of the ileum is the ileocecal valve. It's the right lower quadrant. Sometimes we can kind of massage there and actually get food to go from the small intestine to the large intestine. A lot of times that's where food is kind of stuck. Chiropractors know this. They will give you a nice abdominal adjustment and it hurts, but then it's over. So the large intestine is different than the small. It has different purposes. The small intestine is not supposed to be filled with bacteria, but the large intestine is. And that's where we get into some issues, which we're going to talk about SIBO and stuff. So what is leaky gut? So I like this picture because I would like everyone to have like seen cadavers or like been in a surgery at some point, but obviously not everyone has been. But the inside of the gut is supposed to look pretty clean. It's got some mucosal barrier there to kind of make it like, if you imagine the inside of your throat looks like it's got a little bit of mucus so that it's easier for you to swallow the food. It's slippery, but it's not a thick layer. And
So that's a healthy gut, the picture.
that's a healthy gut,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, there's a little bit, these are some of the immune system cells. So what I've learned a lot, you know, in medicine is that sometimes things that look a little funky, like you've got an infection, there's a lot of pus, that's your immune system. That's actually a good thing, that it's reacting. But what we see with the intestine is you can be overreacting, right? So like even just from pollen you're breathing in, or if you're eating gluten and you shouldn't be eating gluten, if you're like probably 90% of people that shouldn't be, you are are making more mucus to try to, and then that causes issues. So it's not just like, because you've got to absorb the nutrients through the lining. So this is the intestinal lining. We have to get the nutrients through the lining into the bloodstream and get the bad stuff out. So it acts like a coffee filter or a sieve. The bad stuff out and the good stuff get to the bloodstream. But the problem is that the intestine is only 1 cell layer thick. Our skin is 8 cell layers thick, right? So if you picture like the roof, the shingles of a roof, the cells are supposed to be overlapping just like the shingles on a roof. But when there's insults over and over and over, when you eat Roundup, the pesticide that they spray, the cells start to open because there's just like so much injury going on.
Like inflammation?
Yeah, and when they push open like this, or you have a food bolus and things ferment and all this gas puffs it out.
Food bolus.
Food bolus, like you're not digesting because you're stressed out or you're on the computer. So, if there's a gap there, whole proteins can be introduced into the bloodstream that should not be. And that is one of the hallmarks of autoimmune disease is something happened where leaky gut started. The gut became like holes in the garden hose. And then the immune system starts attacking these proteins, and all of a sudden the immune system is just on attack mode. And it'll turn on your joints or your skin or your thyroid or your pancreas. It will turn because it's in over attack mode, right? So it's an imbalance of the immune system. And a lot of times people with autoimmune disease even tell me like, they feel like they constantly kind of feel like they have a cold or they feel sick. Well, this side, this is called the Th1, Th2 balance, but the balance is not there. So you're not fighting foreign invaders like you should be, you are fighting yourself. So we've got to fix that balance with a few different things. But the number one thing is, can we stop what started it in the first place, which is the leaky gut? It's I know it's like a really complicated topic, but that's kind of just the basis of all of it. It's known as intestinal hyperpermeability. So it just means like hyper, too much, permeable means it can go right through. So too much is going right through. We can do a leaky gut test. We can do a zonulin test. But to be honest, I sometimes find that zonulin comes back negative on people I was expecting it to be positive on, and it doesn't change the plan. So I'm trying to do tests only that like are going to change my plan of attack.
Used to, people wouldn't call it leaky gut too, right? That was like a poo-poo word. They're like, that's ridiculous.
Even like I was working in a busy family practice in 2015, 2016 in Cary, and the doctor there said like, this isn't a thing. And I was like, oh, there's so much evidence that this is a thing.
Right.
I mean, there's journal after journal article. Now, there's not a pharmaceutical company that is going to make money off of, finding this. So there may not be as many studies as there are on something like Lipitor, but there are still studies. And some of the better ones come from Europe just because the way their research is different. So the book on the left is one of my favorites. Dr. Josh Axe is actually an acupuncturist. I believe that's the book where in the beginning he tells you all about his mom's journey with breast cancer and how he got her to change change her diet. He's not saying go out and take handfuls of dirt, but the title is something you don't forget. So yeah, the beginning of the book is a lot about how we're over cleaning things. If you have a dog and you let the dog kind of come in and say hi to you after it's been outside, your immune system's going to be healthier. We know that, so now let's go back and figure out why. I feel like my grandmother and my great-grandmother knew this. They knew that it was possible to over clean and that your body had its own natural cleaning mechanism. And then we entered this world of not just hand sanitizers, but I mean, even for women,
everything.
And for women, like using douches, like things like this that's not going with what our body is supposed to be doing, right?
Fear-based society.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Right. So like, of course there are positives of antibiotics and the whole kind of revolution of modern medicine. But really, antibiotics are there so that once or twice in a lifetime they can save our lives, and that's not how they're being used. So, of course, he talks about that, the overuse of antibiotics too. On the right side, Heal Your Leaky Gut. I think that's a really good book too. And then, so I just wanted to touch on vegan versus paleo. So I'm not really here today to debate anyone who has a spiritual belief about how they want to eat. And I've said this to Mitch before, like, but if people feel bad and they'd like to know how to fix their gut, I would encourage them to have an open mind about what they can and should be eating. And as we go down that journey, we can figure it out. So I've talked to people that were vegan for 10 years and they said, I just thought I did it because I thought it was healthier. And even their acupuncturist, who traditionally was kind of like a more spiritual person who was against animal proteins, so many acupuncturists in this area and other areas are all for meat, because what we don't want to happen is that you say you don't eat meat and therefore you eat a ton of carbs and sugar, right? And that's what often happens. My sister was vegetarian for most of her life until just getting Graves' disease last year. And she went to see an acupuncturist in LA, of all places, who said, you must eat meat. I don't care, you know, because she was like, you know, to my sister Shannon, you've been eating a long list of too many carbs, between like sugary protein bars to her go-tos were always things that were filled with sugar, grains. Yep. And so she needed to get back on track with, what does it feel like when you eat a meal that has protein and has vegetables? How do you feel after that? How can you digest that? It's a whole different feeling of digestion than when you're eating grains constantly. And obviously a mixture of different types of foods would be ideal. I think one of the problems I noticed, like I mentioned to you guys, my thing was bagels and cream cheese. So I overdid it, you know? I mean, there was no moderation, and everything really in our lives in general should be moderation. So you could be doing really great, and then all of a sudden you eat, you know, 3 times the amount of nuts you maybe can handle for 6 months, and then you're feeling really, really awful. So it's not that one food is bad and one food is good. It's that we need to look at the whole picture. And things like cooked vegetables, for the most part, cooked greens, cooked leafy vegetables are never going to be bad. Could you eat too much raw spinach or too much raw kale? Sure, because there's an acid in there that can prevent the absorption of some of your other vitamins. We're not supposed to be eating all one thing. So, I mean, I just put these up because I wanted people to know the definition. If you've never heard of these diets, feel free to go look them up. It's hard if you stop, even if you take a week where you try not to eat dairy and gluten and you're new to this, it is hard because everywhere you go, you realize that so many things that are convenient are dairy and gluten. So I actually like that both of these, well, really the vegan it has more gluten, but I like that these diets are getting the dairy out. I think that's a good start, right? But we all have to start somewhere. In my family, we were vegan for like all of 2012. Everybody felt pretty good because we didn't know how to cook vegetables until that point. So we just learned about vegetables. We literally like got cookbook after cookbook on how to cook vegetables. My husband had always been the one to cook, and that was the year that he went back and I stayed home with our son, and I only worked like 10 hours a week, and I actually learned how to cook vegetables. So once we found we could, you know, and Laura will help us with that too, but like things like slicing the eggplant and putting a little tomato sauce and some nutritional yeast and putting it in the oven, like, oh, well now eggplant tastes a lot better because I didn't like chunk it up and try to like make it all soggy by the other ways I was, you know, trying to cook it. And then, so I want to talk about FODMAPs. So our journey in my house has been, we did try vegan. Once my son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, that night he was in the hospital. They came around with the hospital tray and I was starving and I was like, well, screw vegan. Like I need to eat whatever's here because we've been here for 12 hours and we have to give them, you know. So we got home and we looked at everything we'd been eating and we counted up the amount of carbs, and then we started focusing a lot more on carbs. Because my son had been diagnosed with diabetes, we had no choice. We had to calculate every time he ate how much carbs was he eating and how much insulin.
How much carbs were you eating? Just curious, do you remember?
We were not eating as much as the standard American diet, but there were certainly meals that had only 10 grams of protein, for example, and 100 grams of carbs, which to me, that ratio is just a little bit off.
Probably over that 200 mark. Yeah, that's a lot.
And my son was so much smaller, and they kept saying, you know, because he was 1, they kept saying to me, well, he could have up to 300 grams of carbs a day. And I was like, that's an adult. And like, that's not a 1-year-old. Like 1-year-olds are supposed to be, first of all, he'd been breastfed and he knew to eat what he was craving, and he wasn't craving carbs. You know, he was craving vegetables and meat. That's what his body needed. I think that most kids are born that way, and we do everything we can to kind of mess them up.
Formula.
Or they have some fungal things or some underlying issues. That's certainly true of a lot of
Did he
kids.
beef up once they once you went from the carbs to the protein?
Oh yeah, he'd always had like really high muscle tone, but he'd lost a lot of weight in the like 4 days before we had him diagnosed, and he gained that weight right back. I mean, he'd been 25 pounds on a Thursday. By Monday, he was 20 pounds, so he lost a big percentage. And he broke his leg the next week we were home. He was running and he fell, and I'm like, he wouldn't have broken his leg.
Had he been eating more nutrient dense?
Right. And greens, because he could never process dairy ever, but he loves greens. Yeah. And so, and the calcium that we absorb from our grains, as a lot of us know, is easier. It's easier to use than the calcium from dairy.
If it's cooked.
Right, if it's cooked. But the dairy farmers want us to think otherwise, and they have a giant multi-billion-dollar lobbying group in DC. So be wary of anybody that's spending that much money to tell you what to eat. Right. So then the next step was, after my daughter was born, my daughter and I did the FODMAPs because we had so much indigestion, and what I looked at was the different fruits we were choosing. That was the number one thing I looked at that point, was could I have grapefruit instead of banana? You know, it's like a pretty simple switch, but a banana is so many more carbs than a lot of us need right there in one serving. Or could I, if my son was asking for a banana, could I give him half, you know? And I could give him a lot less insulin, and we were all healthier, and it affected our mood so much more to have sort of a steady blood sugar. So we kind of went from looking at like nutrients to blood sugar just in our lives. I found the FODMAPs very, very challenging. At that time, I was also postpartum, but I remember we were driving with 2 little kids up to New Jersey from North Carolina, and I was sobbing, and my husband was like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "There's nowhere here that I can get any food." Like, and he was like, "Maybe we should have brought a cooler." And he was kind of joking with me, but every trip after that, I had a cooler in the back seat. And it took us longer to pack, but I didn't sob the whole
Like, so you were sobbing because the FODMAPs was so hard. Was that because so many things are off the menu, or because you have to really look at your portions on FODMAPs?
I think it was, to me, it was actually just I didn't know anyone else who was doing it or had any idea what I was doing. So to me, I actually think it was more of a social support.
Did you feel like you had to be, now I did FODMAPs for quite a time sometimes, did you feel like you had to be perfect every day?
Oh, yeah.
Or did you kind of go like, all right, it says has 4 spears of asparagus here, can I have like a bunch?
No, because I felt so bad at that time. It's also dealing with, my daughter had a tongue tie, she wasn't sleeping, and I had 2 really young kids, and I was trying to continue my life, but really my whole life needed to pause, you know? But it almost, to me, kind of swung into the eating disorder area of having to control so much. And that's always, like, growing up as a tomboy, I was always taught, like, you listen to your body, you're an athlete, like, you don't worry about dropping weight, you just think about how strong you are. And that went against it, because I was then, 1/8 of an avocado was all I could have in a day. So if I wanted half an avocado, I couldn't eat it. But the problem was I felt so bad if I did cheat and eat half an avocado, I felt really sick. So my digestion was really off for a lot of reasons. I mean, at that point, I'd been nursing for like 5 years, so I hadn't really been drinking alcohol. But yeah.
No. I said, how long were you doing the FODMAP? How long did you do that?
I think we did it straight really religiously for 2 months, but then we continued it for about 5 months. And it helped. But what I say to people is, you do not have to do that.
Right.
You can look at this diet, take what works for you and leave the rest behind. And you also could get more of a support network, because that makes such a big difference. If I could have called somebody who didn't think I was a lunatic for trying this, because they actually understood how sick I felt, then it would have been a little bit easier.
Definitely.
And Facebook wasn't working then. I don't know. It just was overwhelming to me.
Yeah.
So I needed like in person, you know.
So can you just touch on the fermentable part?
Yeah. So we're going to talk about histamines in a minute too, but sometimes things that are fermentable or are already fermented when we eat them actually create a shift. And so we can overdo it on fermented things. Like, for example, apple cider vinegar or kombucha, or even aged things like cheeses. Yeah. And to me, when I look back on it, you have to look at the whole person and not just one complaint they have. So we definitely were living in a house then that had mold, and I didn't know it. And I think my histamine bucket was full from being exposed to mold. And one little sip of kombucha would make like my whole face flush, my whole body feel awful. But but for me, I didn't know that missing piece.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So I think you can't just say, well, all fermented food is bad. No, like maybe some coconut kefir or some different drinks would have been helpful if I had gotten some of the mold out of my system. So it's more like a give and take, especially when you're talking about the histamine bucket.
Even a big one with the fermented stuff that I learned with that was like the yogurts, even like the 12-hour yogurts were no-nos, but the 24-hour yogurt, if it's like fermented an extra 12 hours, like you got to get that in every day because it's going to rebuild things.
Yep. So, I mean, instead of taking, he's talking about like making your own yogurt instead of taking probiotics.
Cool.
So, but I think the other piece to that is, how do we know what your gut's missing? Our studies of the human gut biome are still pretty young and new. So there's lots and lots of bacteria we haven't even discovered yet. Probably some of those are beneficial. Right now we know that lactobacilli and bifidobacterium are important and good, but I think there's others that are going to come up too. I mean, there's others we know, but I think there's probably hundreds more that we haven't discovered. So can you eat fermented products like kimchi or cabbage if your ability to break those down in the gut has taken an assault for some reason, has been knocked down? So it's more just of a gradual process, I think, of getting it back. For me, at that time, I thought, just take the FODMAPs out and then eat normal and you will have healed yourself. It's not really like that. It's more like paying very special attention as you start to eat other foods about, how you feel. It's more gradual than it is like a switch. And, a lot of people say, well, I'm lactose intolerant, so I take a lactase enzyme. Well, the problem with that is there's other things sometimes in milk that you might be reacting to. You might even just be reacting to the fact that they pasteurized it and took out all of the good bacteria you needed to break it down. So I think the fermented thing is more of like a moderation and I've certainly talked to people that from the get-go, they're from Korea and they ate a ton of kimchi and they've never had an issue. That's probably more beneficial than us as adults trying to fix everything, And then I do see a lot of people, especially more elderly, that cannot handle sorbitol and mannitol, artificial sweeteners. And they're hidden in things. Like there's electrolyte solutions. This one patient I was using, she didn't realize it had sorbitol. And sorbitol, a compounding pharmacist friend of mine taught me, is corn. A lot of us are reacting to like what they sprayed the corn with. You have to be careful because the FDA allows us to use words like honey. Honey doesn't mean anything. Honey on the shelf can be, corn syrup can be added to it. So what does organic honey mean? Well, then you have to go look it up. What does organic beef mean? Well, organic beef could have been fed organic soy, which my daughter couldn't have because she was reacting to soy. So like different things like that, you have to start to investigate and not trust. And then it feels overwhelming at times, for sure.
Absolutely.
And FODMAPs to me is pretty overwhelming for most people. So I'm not necessarily recommending people try it, but I want you to know what it is in case you're thinking, I really need to make some more big changes. I like the gaps. So Kelly Brogan is a psychiatrist in New York City who's written a book on Eat for Your Mood, and she's now made her book free so you can go online and download it. Healthy fats, trying to get rid of carbs, trying to get rid of sugar. Now I'm not talking about zero carbs, but the healthier carbs, like the grapefruit instead of the banana, that kind of stuff. And the GAPS diet has been around a long time. And I think because some of it in the beginning was not based completely on science, people will kind of poo-poo it. But I think nowadays, what I was trying to show you with introducing these different diets is a lot of them have things in common. So bone broth and high nutrient density meats and wild fishes. I mean, pretty much all of the healthier elimination type diets would include those things. GAPS, the idea is, can we eat healthy enough or nutrient dense enough and well enough that when we digest our food, the signal that is sent from our gut to our brain is make more happy hormones, make more good hormones. And that's actually really a thing. If you eat junk, you feel like junk, right? But then you feel so bad, you can't really make decisions about how to eat healthy. So it's kind of a snowball effect. And so like if I eat potato chips the next day, I want potato chips. That's just how my brain is, you know? So I think understanding that sometimes is helpful. And let's see. GAPS, they also talk about including essential fatty acids that we may be missing, like a fish oil supplement, or I think you mentioned choline before too.
Oh yeah, I like choline for the bowel.
Vitamin A, digestive enzymes, and then maybe some minerals we're missing. So traditional lab work, when we go to like a regular medical practice, doesn't really check for all the things that we need to have checked. They'll say, we checked your CBC and your electrolytes and you're fine. And really what we need sometimes is a deeper dive, and we can do different testing, or we can just look at signs. Like if you spend an hour doing a physical exam on someone, like I said, you find signs that they're missing certain nutrients. So what time is it? 'Cause I don't want to...
It's like 1:49.
Okay, got to stop. So I'll stop at 2, Laura. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the keto diet. So there's, controversy about all these diets, but I think, like I said, some of them have a lot of things in common. The people that I know that are the healthiest, even if they're eating meat, they eat a lot more vegetables than the carbitarians that I know. So even on keto, the whole bottom of your pyramid can still be vegetables. The kind of vegetables that do not raise your blood sugar. So you have to learn about what that is, and it's a learning process. So for me, I actually found, even though autoimmune people sometimes have issues with nightshades, I actually found eggplant was fine. What I couldn't have sometimes was like a butternut squash. That to me would like make my blood sugar go up higher. So maybe there's something there. Sometimes squash or cantaloupe are related to some pollens. Like maybe I'm having an allergy there, and it's the stress hormone is driving my blood sugar up. How do you know this without checking for your urine for ketones or checking your blood sugar? Well, it's kind of hard to know. Some people do have symptoms though when their blood sugar goes up.
So you found that issue with the squash by checking your blood sugar after your meals and seeing?
Yeah, I mean, we have like multiple cucumbers all over my house. So because my son, so it's
Were
easy
you
for me to
continuous
check
or
it.
were you pricking?
I was pricking, but I mean, I'm going to get a continuous that people could just rent out from my office. So what you do is you just put this little device on, you wear it for a whole week, and it sends me the data, and I can see what your blood sugar does every single day.
I want it so
even
bad.
in the middle of the night. So
That is such a cool
No, you're
thing
good.
for people to get in touch with their food.
Yeah.
Is it continuous? I want one bad.
And
would
like I
love to
said,
do that.
the tricky thing, like even with keto, is some foods will kick people out of making ketones. So and the basis, if you're really unfamiliar, is just that we usually burn sugar for energy, especially our brain can only use glucose. But it turns out our brain can also use ketones. And so you can't really be half in and half out with ketosis. You're either in or you're out. And so like I have one patient that can't get herself out of ketosis right now, even though she's eating like some more carbs, and there's some sort of adaptation that's gone on there because she's done it for so long. And then other people that, try really hard and they're like, man, I only had trace and I've been trying for 4 days to like not eat too many carbs so that I could get into ketosis so that I would be more in fat burning. The thing I do want to caution though, the thing that like they keep reinforcing in school is what's good for someone who's pretty sedentary is not always the best for someone who's really active. Like if you're training for the Olympics and you're exercising 4 hours a day, there's different things I would say to you, versus if you're like me and you're sitting in your office most days. And that sitting part is probably why the keto diet is so popular and helpful right now, is because like even if we go to the gym a couple times a week, we're sitting at the desk the rest of the day, and so we our blood sugar doesn't like the sitting, obviously. We should be moving a lot more, and we should try to figure out how to do our stuff while we're moving. So, but so if you look into, there's like wars online with all these things. I have a friend who's like a keto runner. So she gets into ketosis, she goes for a run, she can run a lot farther when she's burning ketones than when she's burning glucose. And in my functional medicine program, we talked about that. And the professors are all kind of like, we need more studies. We do not understand necessarily yet the long-term effects. And so I think that is important. I'm not saying to my friend, don't do it. I think it's great that she feels so good. I don't know that running is the best activity for anybody because it's so hard on us. But my point is, like, we do need some more long-term studies on some of these things in order to have like academic establishments really back them up. So, and then with histamines, we talked about this already. Aged cheeses, you know, you can break down histamines depending on how you're methylating. And so we do have genetics that can interfere with our methylation. And it's complicated, but you don't have to like biochemistry to understand that when you eat or are exposed and are producing too many histamines, any little thing can throw you over the edge. So it's like the straw that broke the camel's back. You were having a great day and you felt fine, and then all of a sudden that one food that raised your histamines gives you brain fog and makes you feel really tired. And so for me, like that might be like an aged cow's milk cheese, because I don't do so well with cow's milk. But for somebody else, it could be a pickle. And they're like, they don't know what happened in that meal that they feel bad, because they ate a bunch of different things. They didn't just eat the pickle, you know?
So you were saying earlier, like your histamine bucket can be full. So is the only way to like empty it or lower it just by not eating any of these things that raise your histamine.
Or you can increase the things that would break down this and get rid of it. Pigs don't get seasick because they have a ton more DAO enzyme than us. And seasickness is caused by elevated histamines. So you can take that pig DAO enzyme, put it in your mouth, swallow it. It's really expensive though.
Yeah.
It might be cheaper to just try not to eat that whole avocado.
Yeah.
So, but like, is there a replacement? Is there something you really love to eat that's on this list? Could we replace it with something that's also healthy? Because a lot of these foods are not so bad for you, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm interested, because I feel like a lot of this is what's touted as healthy.
Right.
And so like, even I can see many things
Right.
on this list that I commonly eat. So it's an interesting
Right.
concept that like most people aren't going to know
Right.
about.
Well, and your genetics have to play in that a little bit if you're feeling good. And then something can tip you the other way. So like if you got a tick bite and you got some sort of tick-borne illness, all of a sudden you may not be able to eat, you know, all these. But again, it's moderation. How many things, if you could write down at the end of a week, how many things did you eat that were on this list? It's probably not 90% of your diet, right? I mean, if I let my kids eat bacon every day, they would, or every meal they would, but
and that's when you're doing keto wrong.
Right.
A lot of people do keto.
Yeah,
I have had the histamine bucket be way too full because I'm eating everything on this list.
And I think sometimes you don't want to go down one of these paths of these specialty diets without guidance, because you can do some damage if you've gone down so far and you haven't talked to anybody that knows about how you're feeling. If you go down the keto route and now you've killed some of your, you know, you can't eat bacon even once a week, or you can't even like drink one glass of organic wine a week without feeling awful, then we need to back it up and figure. So that some of this testing that I'll speak about in just a minute would probably be better to do in the beginning before we go down these roads. But a lot of times that's not what happens. People come to me and they have tried absolutely everything, and some of what they tried has gotten them a little bit worse off. And that's actually why they finally came in, you know. So Dr. Salibi is my collaborating physician. He's amazing. I would love for him to come up from South Carolina one day to do one of these talks with us. He says this is his mantra. This is like, he was in the ER and he didn't love working in the ER because he was seeing the whole person, and he kept seeing the same people come back with the same issues. And then he left to do functional medicine many years ago before it was the thing to do. But all disease begins in the gut was Hippocrates. So this thing that we're like, we think we've discovered it now, they've known a lot of this for a really long time, but we really want evidence and science to back it up. So that's what we're working on. I mentioned this before, but Lyme disease is like a chronic insult to the gut. The spirochete's smaller than a typical bacteria, and it hides in the lymph nodes. This is actually very similar to the way HIV hides in the lymph nodes. And most of our immune system, 75% of our lymph nodes are actually surrounding the gut tissue. So if we have an infection and our body's trying to fight it, the gut is what's being damaged. Because say something like HIV, you know, people are infected and it takes about 10 years before they really feel symptoms. But what's going on in those 10 years is their lymph cells in the gut are actually trying to attack the virus. And then the virus is incorporating itself into the lymph system. And Lyme disease actually does not behave that differently from that, which is why if someone's had Lyme disease for 10 years and they've never been treated, it is difficult to ever cure them because it's hard to get it out of every single lymph node where it's hidden. And then sometimes it's like the chicken and the egg. Did you get leaky gut because you were exposed to gluten, or did your leaky gut come from hand sanitizers, infant formula, BPA, antibiotics, and eventually cause your celiac? And the thing about celiac that I should say is there's a good book, I think I have it in here, called Celiac Disease. It's easy to remember. And he spends most of the book talking about non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And I think what happens is there really is a spectrum. Some of us are going along and we're eating gluten, and our stress is okay, and our genetics maybe are good. And then things change. And so even though gluten is always a little bit of an inflammatory protein, we handle it without an issue. And then something happens. Like for me, the birth of my second child, all of this lack of sleep and trying to do all these things to fix my family, like full-time, 24 hours a day trying to look up recipes and kind of not having support in that. Then when I tried to put gluten back in, it was like my body was really overreacting. So I have like a non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Mm-hmm. The next thing that I see is people come in to see me and they have really vague symptoms. They don't really have gut issues, so they think. And then we start digging, and then when I test them, their celiac antibodies are positive. And maybe what they had, their symptoms were actually like ADHD or symptoms of nutrient deficiencies, because for so long their gut has not been completely absorbing their food. So what I caution people is, if you're someone who's more non-celiac gluten sensitivity and you've healed, be careful going back to the 100% every meal has gluten, because it is fast. I think the second time around it's faster to get to that celiac kind of slide. There's definitely a genetic component though, but you know, our genes, we can turn them off and on. And so it takes a while, but we can certainly turn them off and on, and stressful events can certainly turn bad genes on. Mm-hmm. People will tell me I didn't have celiac until this and this happened. I got divorced and then this. And then I think we already talked a lot about this. The cells are only one layer thick. What time is it, Laura?
2.
Okay, I've hit on all of this. I kind of just glossed over the gluten thing, but the book, Celiac Disease, is by Andrew Grain, I believe is his name. He explains it really well. I think where he loses people a little bit in that book is he talks a lot about the testing. The gold standard for celiac diagnosis is still a biopsy of the intestine, which most people do not need to do, unless the insurance is going to cover some really fancy, expensive medicine, and they will only cover it if you go do the biopsy. But to that, I would say, you probably don't need the really fancy, expensive medicine if we can get to the root cause of everything else that's going on. Yeah. I don't like doing things just because insurance wants you to do them. So, yeah, but that's a really good book, especially for anyone that you know that's had celiac. Oh, here it is, Peter Green, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Jump the hill over there.
So I'll talk more about those other things next week. I was going to end on just a brief thing about the testing. Like, until recently, I really haven't had food allergy testing that I liked. It's usually expensive, unreliable. I used to do it with LabCorp, and I would do an IgG panel, which is basically the immune globulins that can react to food, and people would come back allergic to absolutely every single thing that was in there. I'm like, this can't be. So the Dunwoody panel that I've started using now actually checks IgG4 and IgG and IgE. And so you can have a reaction, but it can be countered by one of the other parts of your immune system. And so it's giving me a multi-dimensional look at what your immune system is doing to each food, usually protein we're looking at. And so that's why this is the preferred test, at least in my sort of like circle of mentors within the functional medicine community.
Is this the new one you've been talking about?
Yeah, it's a Dunwoody, yeah. Okay. So we'll see. There's always room for better technology when it comes to, like, we understand a lot of this really well, but we don't have the best scientists that are being funded to find new tests. And that's, again, because like there isn't a pharmaceutical, you know, so I have a patient who actually wants to do some of this and start a nonprofit and like try to just get some scientists some funding. And there's a lot of really smart people that would like to work on this, but they can't like work for free. And a lot of this research takes years and years to develop a test. Like if you guys have heard about that Theranos scandal, right? Where she like thought she developed this great test. I think she knew it was a bad test. You heard about that years ago? A couple years ago, it was like the youngest billionaire in the world. She was from Silicon Valley. You could get a blood panel from one drop. She was testing all of these things from one drop of blood. So you could buy it at the pharmacy and test yourself. And it turns out it was fraud. Like she was diluting it. All these things were happening because in her mind, and I think it started innocently, where she thought, like, this is where the future's going, this is what we should be able to do, but the science is not there yet.
Gotcha.
And it's frustrating because it's almost like there's a little lag, like the science should be there, but all of her investors sued her. I think she might be going to jail, but
Okay.
but anyway.
The moral of the story is fraud is not good.
Yeah, and we don't want to jump on tests before we know they're good. Like there's a couple places saying that they will figure out your gut microbiome if you just give them $800. Well, turn on the brakes for a second. Like, let's see, especially when that same company wants to sell you their curated probiotic that's just for you. If they're trying to sell you a product, I would be like, so.
Or anything that says prepared proprietary blend.
Yeah, they won't tell you what's in it. It's probably corn and
we don't know how much.
Thank you. So let's take a couple minutes to stretch. As I said, sitting is bad.
Oh!
Thanks
awesome.
for listening.
Yeah, thank you for that information.
I have one daughter that has alpha-gal
Uh-huh.
and for the tick bite.
Yeah.
And so they don't know a lot about it.
Yeah.
So she just can't have any mammal meat at all.
Yeah, I have, I think, 3 patients that have that.
Yeah, that's pretty
Even
scary.
gelatin.
No gelatin.
Yeah.
No, you have to be careful with any kind of vitamins.
Yes.
She gets vitamin D. She has to get
Yeah.
the vegetarian thing.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
pretty scary.
Yeah.
I know one man who killed himself. I mean, it's like they say if you go a long time and not have the meat,
Mm-hmm.
and then you
Slowly.
reintroduce it, or kind of get it from. First, she couldn't have cheese. I don't know what it was about the cheese, but she couldn't have that either. Milk for a long time, but she has been able to do the dairy again.
Mm-hmm.
But and now she just eats chicken and turkey, and so she said, I don't really miss it, but she said I would like to get tested again just to see. It's been a couple of years.
Well, and it's similar to celiac, where you can retest the antibodies, and that helps you know how the person's doing. Yeah.
But she didn't get it from a tick bite.
No.
She got it from sugar bites. Do you know what they are?
Yep.
She was she's a nanny. She was out
Yeah.
with the kids in the yard, and her belly was just full of like these 17 or 18 bites, and she was in there were inflamed and red. They were horrible. And then this was like in the fall, and then about a month later, we had steak, and she says my tongue feels weird, and then I said, well, it's just maybe something, who knows. Then the next time she ate leftovers, and the fat on there is what gives you that reaction.
Yeah.
And she started drooling. She said, my tongue is, and so.
And then it gets.
I had just read an article, because I read all the natural stuff about alpha-gal, and I never heard of it before. The doctor insured her. She had an antibody. Yeah, it's pretty scary stuff out there with ticks. They're keeping them off of you.
And in Long Island, they're blowing in the wind. Like these ticks are literally blowing in the wind, and 90% of them have Lyme. I mean, it's crazy.
That's scary.
Because it's almost like because we overdo things, right? So whatever we're doing becomes an extreme, and then the infectious diseases, it's harder to control them once we ruin the environment. Somebody used to eat the ticks, the deer, right?
Yeah.
So we killed all the deer.
I've met people that eat the ticks. Have you heard of that?
No.
Oh yeah, I've met people like wilderness people. Like they'll eat ticks, and they think that helps their immune system. And I'm like, interesting. Yeah, I'm always gonna say that's interesting.
That's
You got a
interesting.
recipe. Good for you.
Fun fact of the day.
I have a special tick recipe.
Fun fact of the day. Please don't go eat ticks. I'm fasting. That food looks really good.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I have a lot of issues with it.
We didn't talk about that. So we can talk about that at the end.
I'm
It was in your
curious about
ketogenic slide.
Oh yeah, it was, yeah.
Everybody move.
I'm just
Don't
gonna
sit
see what's
yet.
going on with my phone.
Patrick Mercola does a I can't remember what he calls it, but it's like he's like this, and it's something like this,
He's got the exercise.
and it's something like I can't remember. It's called a nitric oxide down. He does that several times a day.
There is a new radio ad on on UNC that's like wait, what is it called? It's for a man's nitric oxide testosterone booster that they're selling.
Nugenics.
I forget the name. No, it's not Nugenics.
Have some beets. Get in the sauna.
Yeah.
I didn't do that for my whole pregnancy, and then I'm not a part of the gym anymore. So it's been a long time since I got this sauna.
I'm obsessed.
There's an infrared sauna at the have you been to the Wellness Collective? I'm trying to find where there are more.
I want one in the house eventually.
Yes, that would be awesome. That would be ideal.
And a float tank. And a cryo chamber.
You guys
Soon I'm
know
getting the Tractor Supply, like big thing, so I can do ice.
Yes.
Oh man, that's my favorite.
Yeah, like just the big bits.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I lived in Napa. They have those everywhere. I'm like,
Yeah.
"This is-
We do it
so
at a
much
CrossFit
easier."
gym that I go to.
And put a sous vide in there and make it warm.
That's
There's got to
funny.
be a way to do this
That's
stuff at
funny.
home.
I mean, I think meditation and yoga are great. I can't get in a float tank. I'm so claustrophobic.
I don't
Oh,
think I
man.
would
Some
like that.
people, I
I've
can
never tried
imagine
it.
it.
I have flown, like, I'm not afraid of heights at all. I've flown planes. I can't. There's
That's
something
like
about,
people
like,
who do cave diving or stuff. I'm like, oh.
one day maybe I'll get up the nerve, but
It's crazy.
it is a good idea to just have you heard of these? It's like sensory deprivation, so you're in there, but they close the lid,
I've
right?
had it. Now, when I was
Could they leave the
super-
lid open for me?
I think they
if
do.
you
They
can, like-
do have them now where you can have like a glass, I believe, so
Oh.
people that do feel claustrophobic.
Uh-huh.
When I was
That would
super
not- I
limey,
know
I
it's
would
like-
get like full on hurts like
Mm-hmm.
crazy. But now it's like the first 30 minutes, 20 minutes might be like, but then I'm like blissed
How
out.
long are you in there?
2 hours. I'll go 2 hours.
If you're gonna get in a meditative state though, like you might be able to.
It's like
Yeah.
I want
Yeah.
I want that
Well,
like.
I had my
spirit.
dental work done, and I realized when she started, because I had to have mercury removed, so she covered my whole face, including my nose, and they put little oxygen cannulas. But you really have to trust that cannula is going to keep giving you oxygen, because you kind of can't talk to say stop.
Uh-huh.
They tell you raise an arm, and I realized I was in my mantras, like I was like
You have
doing
to
all
be.
my.
You're like, how am I gonna get through this?
I was like, I should ask for Xanax. I didn't. It's too late.
I should have asked for Xanax. That's funny. Box breathe.
Wait, I was in labor. I can do labor again.
Exactly. That is the mantra that's always. I've been through that. I can do it.
Well, I don't want to.
Who's your dentist?
Dr. Shireman, she's one of the only ones still accepting. There's 3 in the area I would recommend, and she's the one that like still has openings. The other ones have such a long waiting list. But she's really great. She's great.
I have a lot.
Yeah.
Not having Sjogren's and not having
I know.
moisture in my mouth is like
Yes.
pounds and all that.
The dentist that did most of my mercury ones is in jail for fraud.
So I would not recommend.
I think he put 8 fillings in my mouth in 1 year when I was 20.
My God.
And like after that, the thyroid started. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, I'm sure it's probably part of my problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's expensive.
You gotta
to
get 'em
to-
out.
It is.
Right
Well,
way.
so the other thing I like about Dr. Sharman is I don't think she's more expensive. So she's done the extra training. She wears a hazmat suit. Like she's covered, so she doesn't breathe in the mercury. She makes sure you don't.
read it while we're sitting there.
Well,
yeah.
she's pretty good. I mean, we probably breathe a little bit more than she does, but if you think about it, she's doing them every day, so she really has to be.
I'm sure she has to do lots of protocols just to get
Yeah.
that.
Right? And there's so many dentists that are not doing that.
Yeah.
What's her name?
Well, think about people that are in
Shireman's
surgery with X-rays.
Shireman. Yep.
For the tongue
And it's
tie.
Cameron Village Dentist. Oh yeah, tongue tie we'll talk about next week too.
Do you have to go to a special doctor for that?
There are people that will just do it with scissors, clip it.
Like at my wife.
Yeah, I mean I've thought about doing it too, but it will
Really?
bleed when you're not a baby. I mean it still bleeds a little bit when you're a baby, but it gets more vascular the older you get. But the idea is that like that tongue, if it's pulled, is pulling on the vagus nerve, which really needs to relax in order for you to digest your food. And so we'll talk about that next week a little bit too.
I didn't know it's to the vagus nerve.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I want to get it
Yeah.
done. We actually had some friends in yesterday, and they were all talking about their youngins getting little ones getting their tongues tied together. I'm like, I've got that. I've got to get that done.
Yeah.
They're like, they're change like their
Yeah.
behavior and stuff.
Yeah.
Can't believe that. Anyway.
Laura's learning about tongue
Conversation
ties too.
stresses me out.
Yeah.
You've done.
I just moved to Durham, yeah. Moved from South.
All right, are we recording?
Yeah, I never paused it. I'll take the middle out.
The live is great for the. Hopefully you're on break.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go see Dr. Sherman.
All right, guys. So I'll tell you a little more about me. I was a professional chef for about 10 years, and then I had my baby, so I took a break from that. And in the interim, and a little before that, I kind of started on my healthy food journey. So I'm Italian, and I grew up with all the goodness that comes with that. You know, food is family. Coming around the table is like what we did, and a lot of unhealthy habits came from that, which took a long time to break, and I'm still working on it. But it was really hard for me because that was my basis. And when I came to start my healthy eating journey, my clean eating, it was really hard for me to break it because I still love food and I still want to come around a table and still have that be a celebration. So what I really embrace is, you know, the ability to do that. And I think what Kate talked about, a lot of her challenges are having the social support to be able to stick with a really hard diet or these restrictions. So my passion is really educating people on how to eat a little cleaner. And some of the diets we talked about aren't necessarily my focus. That's a little extreme, but I really want to have people who are starting from scratch, because I think we have so much that's ingrained in us. And when we think about starting a journey that's clean eating, it's overwhelming and it seems impossible, and we just, but before we even get started. So for me, that change came about because I really just wanted to be doing better, and I hadn't figured out how for so long. And I did a lot of compulsive eating too. So like I said, because it was the focus around the table and enjoying yourself, it was okay for me to sit there and overindulge constantly. So the work started just wanting to make a change and not really being sure how. And so for me, it just started with introducing small things. And I think that's what I really encourage people who are starting from scratch. It's what can I do to start? And then it became, like we were talking about, I kind of taught my body to eat this way, because now my comfort food is like a big bowl of cooked greens, and all that healthy stuff is really what my body craves now. But I think until you clean it up and start to eat that stuff, you're not able to be in tune with that at all. So it started for me that way. I just started introducing it slowly, and I was a chef, so with that lifestyle, it's really difficult. Like, you basically don't eat even when you're cooking all day. And so I really had to make a lot of changes, and we actually created a company out in California that was wholesome eating, and we delivered meals to people. So I really embrace these tricks and tips because I think we have to be realistic about the life we lead now. And Kate talks a lot about that, but it's really hard to just say you're going to eat clean and do it, because we are always go, 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 and we don't have a lot of time, and a lot of people aren't going to spend the time to focus on it. So we tried to break that barrier with that company, and then when I became pregnant, it just changed everything for me, because it wasn't about just me anymore. So that really jump-started me, and now my daughter is about 14 months. This is Ava. And she loves being in the kitchen, and she's just seen all the healthy food that we eat and cook together, and it's really cool because that is what she eats and that is what she craves. And so that to me has been a big turning point. But now I also totally understand even more why it can be so hard to do it, because you don't have a lot of time and there's a lot of challenges that come from them. So like I said, my goal is to make it easier and simpler for you guys. So a lot of the tips and tricks I have come from my professional background, and what we kind of do to make things easier. So I'll touch on all that, but if you have any questions, jump in, because I do have a problem with, I tend to have the mentality, I cooked professionally for so long, I think it's all easy or straightforward. So please jump in if you're like, what are you talking about?
How do you make a potato?
Yeah, exactly. How do you make a potato? Because that is some people's starting point. So this is a little handout for you guys, and if anybody's joining us online, just happy to email it.
So good.
Yes, because I think that clean eating can still be healthy and really delicious, and that's a big message I try to send too, because I think a lot of people think of clean eating and think it's boring and terrible and about all the hard things about it. So what changed my mentality so much, and my husband like drove this into me for so long, but I always thought of food as a plate. And even the USDA is telling us how to eat the nutritional way. It's about that plate mentality, and your meat's here, and your carbs here, and your vegetables here. And I think coming into that as cooking, it's too much pressure, and it's a little overwhelming to try to think of every meal like that. So shifting to just thinking of a bowl and almost throwing it together, and it doesn't have to be this structured thing on the plate where you have the different colors or the different textures. It really made my life so much easier. And this graphic itself is so awesome because it's more about putting together what you already have, what you already cooked, and it becomes a lot less overwhelming. So the bowl mentality is what you'll hear me talk a lot about. And I know that we talked some about how grains cannot be good. So if this is something that's not a part of your diet, it's really easy to eliminate and still have a lot of options. So you'll see, I walk you through just different options, and I like you can hang this on your fridge because it's really that easy. As if you're going shopping or if you already have some of this stuff in the house, it kind of gives you those ideas, because I think what a lot of us lack is inspiration. At the end of the day, like, we're tired, we're burnt out, and putting dinner together seems like a lot. So what I really want you to draw from this is some encouragement, inspiration to just go for it and have a fun meal. Because even for me, keeping some of this stuff on hand, like we talked about fermented products, I always have some of that. Things like hemp seeds, any kinds of nuts and seeds. If you think about just throwing that on at the end, it's really going to change the texture and the colors, and it's going to make your meal more exciting. So I think it's nice to have this on hand to say, oh yeah, I do have something else I can add. This is a little boring or bland. So that's one thing I really like about this too, to kind of keep you excited. At the bottom, I just did what I usually do for bowls, but if you're following a specific diet, of course you can change this.
And I like the right picture here, how you have black rice on top. Yeah. I always think of rice having to be on the bottom, but I want to eat a little less of it. Yes. And so I love that it's like.
Cool, I'm glad you brought that up, because the rice thing has been so awesome for me, because I do not think of a garnish. Black rice and brown rice are both really good if you get it crispy in a pan. So use a little bit of fat, whatever oil you like. And then,
after you cooked it?
Yeah. So you cook it the plain way, it's like leftover rice in your fridge, right? It's just sitting there. And then maybe you have a small nut. And then you just you put it in and you kind of let it sit, and you want one flat layer. You want to see some holes, because otherwise it's just going to steam, and you want the heat to be pretty high. Okay. But then you get this crunchy, chewy result that now, to me, like Kate said, it's more of a garnish than the base of it. And I just love doing that now. So I'm like thinking in my head, as a chef, I'm very much texture is important, and I think the satisfaction of a meal, definitely, if everything's mush, you're not going to be as satisfied. So I think it's something to consider when you are putting your meals together. So for me, like, this is a really crunchy element to add that's totally good for you.
My meals are, this is blowing my mind. My meals are so simple, like, and that's how I teach people how to do it. It's like just cook it with some fat and some garlic and some salt and pepper, and it's like, a green, a starch and a meat. Versus like having that looks
and
way
you
better.
See a lot of that, like if you follow anything on social media, or even there's companies who will deliver healthy meals that are perfectly balanced, especially for athletes, but they look so bad and boring and bland, and it breaks my heart, because like, eating clean does not have to be this way. I mean, these meals are so nourishing and satisfying, and it can, like, how many elements are in this dish? It seems like a lot, but I'm going to kind of teach you how to make that simpler as well, because we don't have time for that, right? We have time for one veggie, one meat, one carb if we're eating that. So that is a big part of what I'm going to try to teach you. All right, so mise en place is a French term that you always learn as a starting chef, and I like to encourage it because I think it helps in the efficiency of the kitchen.
I'm sorry.
Mise en place. It's French, so it's MISE-EN-PLACE.
Not mirepoix. Is it
nope,
mirepoix?
Nope.
Okay.
So mise en place means everything in its place. Okay. So really, this is just a mentality you bring into the kitchen when you start cooking. And it's unbelievable how much time it saves you. We'll talk more about how, like, in my life, I have a prep day. But it's about setting yourself up for success. So get all your ingredients out you're going to be cooking. Clean everything first. Really that simple. And then have them all in one area. And this is like kind of a little example of how I would set up a station. I have like what I'm going to be cooking and cutting, all the tools I need. I'll have a place for waste, because you wouldn't believe how much time you waste going back and forth to the trash can. And then a place for all my cut stuff, or the stove's right here and the pans are already out. Because it seems silly, but it really is true. You spend so much time going in and out of the fridge, back and forth to get your pot or pan, or back and forth to throw stuff away. And this mise en place concept of just having everything set and ready to go gets you in a good mindset, and you're able to cook for a couple hours and knock it out.
That sounds awesome.
And it's also the same mindset of before you start cooking, like on the stove, mise en place is also important. Like next to our stove, we have olive oil, which we use a ton of. We have our salt and pepper. We have spoons for tasting. So try to keep, like, and any spices you might use all the time, we have a little tray, and that's like our seasoning tray. And so keep that stuff at hand, and whether or not you put it away at the end of the day, that's fine. But think about what you're going to be using and get it all ready, because it's going to save you a lot of time. Mise en place. Yeah, this is just about being creative. So my big challenge in the kitchen lately is my daughter, she always wants to be held. So we got a stool for her to help, and now she helps in the kitchen.
Nice.
But I think it's about thinking about your circumstances and what are your challenges. So is it putting dinner together at the end of the day, you're not inspired? Maybe that's it. Maybe it's like, when do I have the time to cook, or my kitchen is small. So this is just really to encourage you to be creative and think about your circumstances and what works for you as an individual. I'm going to be giving you a lot of like basic general information. So if you have questions specific to your environment, please ask me. I think that it's a big factor that we don't often consider. You got to think ahead about this stuff. It's not just something we can do in passing. It's like making the lifestyle changes that you've made about eating. It's also, this is a lifestyle change. Making the time to cook and setting yourself up for success. I truly believe that. This is batch cooking. So I mentioned before that we do food prep days. Even if I'm not on my food prep day, I'm always going to make more than I'm going to eat in that meal. So if I'm cooking a grain, I will make a big batch and freeze it. If I'm cooking veggies, I'll always make big batches and just leave whatever's left over in the fridge. If I'm doing any kind of one pot thing, like a soup or a stew, I'm doing double, so that part of it can go in the freezer. So we have to acknowledge that there's going to be nights or days that we're just not going to be able to cook. And those are the times where we're going to fall into those bad habits of eating out or buying something that's processed from the fridge and putting it in the microwave or oven. So I think that this is just a change you make, and you do it all the time. So, and little tricks like we line all our pans with foil so that we don't have to wash them. So always batch cooking. All of the grains that we cook, we do brown rice, quinoa. I mean, all the rices freeze well. Beans also freeze well. So thinking about what you can freeze also. And then like we cook on Sunday and everything's good for basically 7 days. Use your judgment, obviously. If something's bad, it's bad. And the more fat you have in something typically will make it go bad faster. But most vegetables, most grains will all be good for 7 days. So we cook on Sunday. I shop on Saturday, we cook on Sunday. And I do cook a little in between, but it's like I said, think about your situation.
So you're steaming and grilling a whole lot more? Or?
No, I do a lot of roasting.
Without fat?
No, I use fat.
Okay.
I love olive oil. I'm Italian. Okay, I'm still working on some
I drink the olive oil.
Yes. So and this was another thing with the mise en place, I keep a big bowl next to my station while I'm prepping veggies, and I'll cut one thing up. I like to roast veggies separate because I think you're going to get a better result. Yeah, I see a lot of people combining vegetables on one sheet pan, but they all cook at different rates. And unless they're really picky about how you cut stuff, like I can be like, a sweet potato takes longer than an onion to cook, so I'm going to cut the sweet potato right. But that's a lot of work here. So I would just roast it separate. We also have like nice small pans with some equipment you can invest in. But I keep this big bowl, and I put the vegetables right in there after they're cut. Olive oil, salt, and pepper. Mix them up. And then I put them on the sheet trays, and I got all my sheet trays lined up. And then I just put them all in the oven. It's about those little tricks.
Yes.
So I do a lot of roasting. I like to roast at 425. If you have a fan in your oven, if it's newer, not all of us have that luxury, that's even better, because what you're going to get is caramelization. This is before it cooks, but when it comes out, it's going to be nice and caramelized, and we're looking for flavor, right, without adding bad things. So to me, roasting at this high temperature is a great way to get lots of flavor. And you're not adding a whole bunch of
What kind of oils do you like roasting with?
I only use olive oil, really.
So I got a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so I'm always telling people to use avocado because it's going to oxidize at a lot higher temperature. But I guess what I would be telling people is that don't go above like 350 with your olive oil because it's got so many antioxidants in it. It's not oxidizing. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So I don't know about the oxidation if that's the factor, but I do know about different cooking temperatures with oils. I'm imagining because you have it on something in a space where there's more things cooking, that what's actually hitting the olive oil isn't that 425.
There you go.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
If you're going to cook meat in a pan, I use canola oil, sorry. But canola oil has a really high smoke point, okay? So if I'm cooking meat and searing in a pan, I'm getting my oil really hot before I put it in, absolutely you need something with a higher smoke point. Okay. But if you're roasting vegetables and it's coated on there and there's all this stuff cooling it down while you're heating it up, it's a little different.
I found a couple good links for somebody I could send you to, because I used to always say that too. Don't make the olive oil above 350.
Right.
Yeah.
But then I started actually like this deep dive into the internet of, is that really true? And one of the websites where he does a ton of research, he proved that like actually you can get the olive oil hotter than we used to say.
And if it's good quality, which that's what I'm getting. I mean, my stuff's spicy. It's got particles floating, it's green, so it's that's interesting.
Yeah, the avocado oil is a great option for searing meat, But I think that's really the only time you have to, even I grill vegetables in olive oil, so yeah, if it's dripping down, sometimes it lights on fire. But I mean, it's, to me, it's pretty appropriate in all situations, unless you're heating it up in a pot and you're wanting it to get to that high temperature before you add something.
And olive oil is so good. I mean, it's the only thing that's really proven by the studies that's showing that it's anti-inflammatory.
Which is so interesting because like there's this avocado oil craze going around, and I bought some, and Brandon, my husband, was like, research the hell out of it. He's like, olive oil is the best, okay?
Oh yeah.
Don't let anyone trick you.
Definitely. Have you heard of the olive oil hunter club?
No.
Whoa. Every quarter you get I don't know if it's light, medium, dark, and it's like from all the different parts of the world. And like I used to get it, and we would do like shot glass like tastings and stuff.
That's really
It's
cool.
so good.
One thing people don't realize too about like high quality olive oils is that as far as flavor, you're only going to be tasting that on something that's finished. So if you finish with olive oil or you're seasoning a salad, the flavor of the oil is really going to matter.
Right.
But when you're cooking with it, you don't taste it at all. So you can use something that costs a little less in that case, and then with your finishing oil,
save it
That's
for
really
the
good,
I would also say you could get an omega-3, omega-6 profile done where you know what you need, and then you could focus your oils on what you actually need.
People don't get. We've gotten so scared of omega-6s and like those.
Right. So a lot of people actually are overdosing their omega-3s nowadays because they're
that's so
overcompensating a little bit.
Big time.
Yeah, because that's the message. So my big message as well is simplify. So a lot of us will turn immediately to, I'm just going to go buy a packaged meal and bring it home and eat it. But there are so many other ways to simplify. Trader Joe's, I just started shopping there recently, has so much that's already prepped, which saves you so much time. So I encourage you to think of simplifying in ways that are still in line with your eating goals, that are, you know, time savers, and not to just go straight for that packaged food. So yeah, they have stuff that's pre-cut. They have a lot of frozen stuff that's pre-cut as well. They even have grains and stuff that you just pop in the microwave and cook. So I'm not asking you to do everything from scratch. Like, I think that's a very unrealistic goal. But there are shortcuts you can take, and you figure out what to simplify in your life to make this stuff sustainable. That's the big message I like to send too, because with diets, I think it's really hard. It's like you said, you get off it and you gain all your weight back. I'm trying to create a lifestyle change that's sustainable. So simplify in ways that will work long term for you, and you don't feel bad about them. And Trader Joe's happens to just be one of them.
Nice haul.
Yeah, this is like our grocery shopping in 1 week. And so you can see we use a ton of the chopped frozen spinach. Things with cans, I get a lot of questions about this. Things that are canned or frozen are actually picked, harvested, and preserved at the peak of season. So a lot of people are under the impression that that stuff isn't healthy, but it's actually sometimes better for you than what you can find in the store, especially if you don't know a lot about seasonality, like where this food's coming from. Some of it can be weeks old, and some of it can just be processed in a way that's not very good. So
I never have seen their frozen spinach.
yes, we use so much. That's 1 week's worth of spinach that Brandon like. Crazy. Lots of eggs. The frozen beets are great. They're not cooked, but they just throw them on a pan. You know, frozen fruit. And then I love the prep kale too, because I eat a lot of that, and that's something that takes a lot of time.
What do you do with the pineapple?
I use it in a smoothie, which there's actually a recipe on the back. It's with spinach, pineapple, beets, and orange or tangerine juice, and then I also use coconut milk. I'll tell you more about that.
Coconut from a can is so important. It's like, it's such a nutrient dense thing that cheap nobody knows about.
That's a big reason I switched. I was using a lot of almond milk, and like, yes, you can make it, but I just think it's so messy and time consuming. Like, I love the idea of it, but in reality, it's very messy.
Yeah.
You have to like sit there and squeeze it. So I was buying almond milk, and I was buying it without sugar. So like that narrows your search down. I could only find it at one store, and it was super expensive. So switching to coconut milk helps so much. It's way cheaper and easier.
Yeah.
And you don't have to use like almond milk. I was using all my liquid as that. With coconut milk, it's so strong. I can do watery and coconut.
Yeah.
And that's why I like it.
Me too.
Another thing I want to pick up on is that start to look and identify habits and patterns that you already have or what you can easily shift. So what helps us a lot with budget and just like clean eating in general was noticing what we are already doing and saying, how can we make that a habit? So things like, I pretty much have a smoothie every day now. And I tend to get bored. I don't like to eat the same thing every day. So I have multiple different types of frozen fruit in the fridge. You can have multiple types of milks. You can do things and create these sustainable habits without being super boring and eating the same thing every That's why the bowl mentality appeals to me so much too. I can prep only like 6 different vegetables or 4 or 3 in the beginning of the week. I'll have my frozen spinach always on hand, like the greens ready to go. And then same with the grains. I'll do 2 or 3 and I have the freezer stash as well. So that I think is what keeps it from getting boring. But look for those habits that you can set into stone, because now our grocery list is more of a checklist every week and an inventory versus starting from scratch every day. And I think that's where meal planning can get overwhelming too. Instead of sitting down and saying, I'm going to have this every day, you're saying, okay, on Sunday, I'm going to roast sweet potatoes, Brussels sprouts, and some beets. And I'm going to cook quinoa and brown rice. I'm going to cook 1 bean or have the canned bean. And then you're putting together your meals as you go, and the shopping gets way easier too. Instead of saying, on Sunday night, I'm going to cook exactly this. And on Monday night, I'm going to cook exactly this. Then you're creating a giant shopping list with all these different ingredients. So.
Mine's just meat centric. Like, we're gonna have salmon this night.
Sure, and that's awesome.
I would love to have all these other options.
And same with meat though. We buy meat at once. We buy it once a week. We freeze it in small portions. So like we eat a lot of ground beef. We just freeze it in 8-ounce portions for both of us. And then we freeze it flat in a plastic bag. So that's really quick to defrost. And then it's the night before, the best way to defrost anything, this is health safety wise, or food safety wise as well, is to defrost it the night before. So instead of being like, oh, it's Tuesday morning, I have so much to do today. Oh my God, I have to think about dinner. Monday night, before you go to bed, you're like, what do I feel like eating tomorrow? You pull your frozen stuff. And then dinner is like brainless.
So my wife always argues with me that it's not good to have the meat sitting out overnight, that it's gonna, because it's thawed.
In the fridge?
No, well, I do it in the sink.
Oh yeah, you shouldn't do it in the sink. So
Really?
food safety wise, you can do it in the sink, but there's like very strict rules around
You
it.
gotta take it out first thing in the morning, you gotta throw it in the refrigerator.
I'm just telling you from a very, like, I've learned a lot about food safety as a professional, and so no, that's not the right way to do it.
Really?
If you're gonna have it in water defrosting, you're technically supposed to have running water on it at all times. Which that's not ideal either. You know what I mean? So the best way to do it is to defrost it overnight in the fridge. Doing it under running water is totally fine, but you're supposed to have a constant flow. So if you cook it, is it take off bacteria and all that? Well, and there's certain bacteria that grow, that can be killed by cooking, but oftentimes it's in a very specific way. Like it has to be boiled for this long. So it's not just cooking it. And like with ground beef, with any ground meat, it's a little more stringent, and it has to be cooked to a very certain temperature, which is pretty high, and maybe we don't want our meat being that overdone.
And the other thing is, bacteria is all an organism. You know, they're all living things that create toxins. A lot of times the bacteria doesn't make us sick, but the toxin it produced does. The toxin needs a much higher temperature than the bacteria does to be killed. And it's usually smaller, which means it's like harder to get rid of it.
Yeah, it's really, there's a lot of myths out there there's myths about like freezing meat in general. So it's the same as thinking about your health. Like sometimes you have to do the research on your own and find out what's actually true versus what the general public is telling you. But there's nothing wrong with freezing meat. If it's been frozen before, absolutely. It's not the best to refreeze it. But if it's never been frozen, there's no problem with freezing it. The best way to defrost it is overnight, but you can't do it in the sink. And that's, to me, the portioning and having your meat in the freezer is also a no-brainer. And you can buy, like, Costco has salmon that's already portioned and ready to go. So I think it's just about thinking about all that stuff ahead of time and doing it one day. So, like, I challenge you to find a schedule that works for you. Maybe you can't do prep one whole day. Like, maybe that doesn't work for you. So it's about thinking ahead and creating this for yourself. But, like, if you're going to be cooking a grain on one night, just do a couple, because it's really only, like, 2 extra pots, and there's not a lot of work involved. It's more just time of the stuff on the stove. Same with the vegetables. Like, you're already turning the oven on. You're already getting a station out to cut and prep everything. So why not do a couple more extra vegetables? So if you can't do a food prep day, if you work every day, whatever, just carve out a little time and say, I'm going to do food prep sections. It's so inefficient to just cook one meal at a time. It just doesn't make sense.
When I was in college, I lived with my aunt for a semester, and she's a really healthy eater. She never had kids, so she does have more time, but she was really busy with her work. So every time she cooked dinner, she took 2 smaller sized glass containers and put her lunch for later in, but she hated eating that the next day, so she put it in a deep freezer in her basement and she labeled it what it was. Like, this was chicken and broccoli. And so she froze it as soon as it was cooked in an individual sized portion for her lunch. So she never bought lunch out. And she's like, Kate, my retirement fund is because I've never bought lunch out.
No, it's true.
Like, if you work for 40 years and you never, you know.
You mentioned like eating, like bringing coolers with you places. Like, you understand this too. As eating clean, like you kind of have to do that, and you have to be prepared for the fact that you're going to be hungry at multiple times throughout the day. Especially if you're active. Like, I don't sit down and eat lunch. I sit down and have like multiple small meals with my daughter who eats every 2 hours.
And when you're breastfeeding.
Yeah, exactly.
There's another-
Right? It's just not realistic for most people to have like a strict meal time, even lunch. Like, people who work don't really take lunch breaks. That's just the industry I was in, but you see it a lot. Like, they're working while they're eating, whatever it may be. So it's about thinking about what your day looks like and how are you going to set yourself up for success. If you hate eating the same thing every day, like, there are ways around that, or just save it for the following day. But yeah, I pack lunch every day from dinner because I'm always cooking more than what we're going to eat, and put it away.
How much time do you spend in the kitchen every day?
It depends. Like, if I have nothing prepped, I can usually, like, if I have nothing prepped and I'm starting from scratch, I'm doing it in one pot. And I'm going to walk you through a recipe that's like everything in one pot, because I think that's another factor to consider. I mean, if I know that I'm not going to have time to cook, then I can spend like 10 or 15 minutes just warming stuff up. If literally everything's prepped, it's not a problem. But I mean, if I know I have more time on days, then I'll spend an hour and a half. And dishes and stuff, like, yes, it's a lot. Doing dishes takes a lot of time.
That's one thing I notice when I fast, and I realize like how much time I spend on food every day. It's ridiculous.
But
Man,
this is literally what you're putting in your body. Like,
Yeah.
that's how so many of us see it this way. Like, it's so time consuming. I just don't have time. Well, really, all the other stuff that you're doing in the day, like, how important is it when you're comparing it to literally something you need to survive? It's fueling your body. You know, you have to shift the perspective, because there's no way around it. Like, it's time consuming, and there's tricks you can do to save time. But at the end of the day, like, yes, it's gonna take time, and it's gonna take physical effort, and it's gonna take thinking ahead. It's gonna take up all the spaces you don't really feel like you have room for.
We also found like our morning routine was like feed the dog, make the coffee, then go ask the kids what they want for breakfast. And my kids changed their mind like 8 times, so I said to my husband, you're not allowed to ask them anymore what they want for breakfast. Other meals, fine, but they're just like, they're sleepy. They're kind of like, wait, you know, it's.
Think about you in the morning.
So, right. So I do those things. I like make the coffee, feed the dog. I start a smoothie. I start what I think they should eat for breakfast. When they come out, they can have their opinion, and we can tweak it a little bit if we've got things prepped in the fridge. But like, it's done. There's no conversations.
Yeah, and that's an example of like adapting it for your lifestyle.
Like, there's a smoothie, there's an omelet, it's usually good stuff.
Have options. Just, these are your only options.
Yeah.
All right. So this is an example of like how, if I was starting from scratch versus I already have quinoa cooked in this example, but everything else was started from scratch. So I'm going to kind of walk you through a one pot meal. So you can change your perspective to when it is time to just like, you have to make dinner at one time. If you don't do the prep ahead, that's okay. But how can you make it more simple? So I have all my ingredients laid out in this beautiful picture. Like I said, it helps to get everything you're going to be prepping out, and then everything prepped. So chopping onions and garlic, we do that in batches too. So we just have it ready to go. We put onion and garlic in everything we eat. So just doing a big, like, think about everything you do and the time it's going to take, and doing a little more of it is going to take way less time than resetting yourself up. I cut everything at once and prepped everything. We've got mushrooms, sweet potato, kale, garlic, and onions, and then our cooked quinoa. Sweat the onions and garlic, and this is another thing, start to consider how long things are going to take to cook. So that's kind of how I'm building this meal, is based on what things will take longer versus less time. Onions and garlic, olive oil, salt, and pepper. Then I added the sweet potatoes. Another lesson I really like to teach is season as you go. So when I'm cooking like this, I season every layer. Don't wait till the end and just be like, oh, it's bland. You know, you really just want to put a little, don't go overboard, a little on each layer as you go, and then at the end you taste it, and it's going to be small adjustments you're making. And this stuff is soaking in while it's cooking too, so it doesn't really make sense to season again. Then I add my mushrooms. They're going to take a little less time to cook than the sweet potato, and then I added the kale. So all of this is going in one pot. Traditionally, you're like mushrooms and sweet potatoes. Think about it a little differently. Just because they cook differently and they're going to take more or less time doesn't mean they can't all go in the pot together.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like an amazing thing at the end of your meal. Like, I have one pot to clean.
Mm-hmm.
And then I literally just combined it. So even if this photo, I can't remember, it might have ground beef in it. Even if you're going to be cooking something that needs to be cooked a totally different technique-wise, like we sear our ground beef so it gets some color on it, you can still do it in one pot. So what you would do is just dump out all your vegetables. You can wipe it out with a paper towel, cook your ground beef, and then you add everything back to that pot. So this time might be a little longer if you're cooking in one pot, but you can be doing your dishes while it's cooking. So really think about, and this is thinking ahead too. I think a big part of efficient cooking is thinking ahead and making a plan for it, but it's going to save you time in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
And then just an example, like this is a bowl for me, right? And I could serve it just like this, and it was delicious. There's nothing wrong with it. But you can add other things if you like to jazz it up, or you want to add some extra nutrients. There's no problem with that. So I just listed some examples of what you can add. Finish it with some different oils or fats. We have protein like every night for dinner. Soft-boiled egg is an awesome go-to if you eat eggs. And then I always like to add something crunchy. And then garnishes. I do a lot of fermented stuff, but anything that's going to add color or texture.
When is dinner?
I know, right?
It's a bad day to fast.
So I did include some recipes on the back. And this is one of these messages, like if you're starting from scratch, these are the basics that happen in our house all the time. Bone broth is really good for you, but it's also a really nice thing to have on hand to add flavor. Like in that meal where I was cooking the kale, if you need to add a little water to steam it, you can just replace it with chicken broth. It's a great way to add flavor. And I really like this because it has fresh ginger and turmeric in it and tons of garlic. So it's really going to boost your immune system, reduce inflammation, and it adds flavor too.
You're throwing that all in one pot and just letting it go for a day or something? So
you see the sheet tray? That's actually all going into the oven first.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So I didn't add olive oil because there's so much fat that's going to come off the chicken.
Yeah.
It's chicken backs
that
I use. And I just dumped it all on there.
And you're using the meat, not just the bones?
No, I'm just using chicken backs. So you can buy chicken backs at Whole Foods.
Chicken backs.
They carve everything off to sell, and they just have them.
Really?
So they sell them for super cheap. So you're still getting, plus they're butchering super quick. So there's tons of meat on it still.
Yeah.
But it's really cheap.
Insider tip.
It's usually not out. You sometimes have to ask for it.
Mm-hmm.
And where do you say you get them at?
I buy them from Whole Foods, but I think any grocery store which has a butcher department and not just a case of meat will have this available. And even if they don't at that time, you can ask them to save it for you.
What a pro tip.
And it's like $4 for a big pot of stock.
Yeah.
And if you do a whole chicken, like that's fine. You pick the meat and save it for something, but it's just way more realistic.
I mean, I make stock. We don't do chicken as often because we're always collecting bones until we got enough.
Same, and it takes forever.
Yeah.
But this is a great little trick. And then, like, if you're doing beef stock too, it's the same. Like, ask for the beef bone. Sometimes they don't have that stuff out, but it tends to be really cheap to buy, and you just have to do a little more investigating.
The favorite part of my house is the, what do they call it? Marrow bones. I get to eat the marrow.
Absolutely, it's delicious.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I put all that in the oven and caramelize it first, because again, you're adding flavor by just adding a little color to it. And even a little char is nice on those onions. And then I throw it all in a pot. And there's lots of fat, so I use tongs to move everything. And I actually strain the fat and use it to cook with, because it's full of all that turmeric and ginger, and it's really tasty.
Oh yeah, good idea.
Yeah, it's bright yellow. I have a picture I can show you. It's awesome. And then chicken, actually, I only cook for about 3 hours.
Really?
So it's something like beef, yes, you want to cook it like up to 8+ hours. It's going to take that long to extract all the nutrients, but chicken needs to cook much less time.
Do you think it's necessary? Like, why are people doing 24 hours then? Is that?
Because it's trendy and people told them they should.
Awesome. Good to know.
That's my opinion.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
I don't know the facts about it, but as, you know, in classic culinary training, yes, beef bones take longer, but you really don't need to.
More than 12 hours.
No.
Good. That's good enough.
I think if you, like, there's great culinary techniques out there that you're, like, re-adding more stuff and cooking it for longer, or you're reducing it and concentrating it. I think all of that is great, but you can strain it and then reduce it.
Yeah.
If you want to save space, if you want to concentrate the flavor, you can just strain everything out and then simmer it to reduce it. But there's really no need to, like, do it overnight.
Really?
I think 12 hours with beef is
right on.
good.
We had bone broth this morning that I put on top of my like leftover chicken before I reheated it,
Yeah.
just so I could like then palate it, because I was like, I do not like leftover meat.
Oh,
So I was like,
and that's a big thing too. Like, I don't use a microwave, and I think everyone's so used to that, so it becomes really intimidating when you're thinking about reheating everything in an oven, because it's like, yeah, everything can get dried out in a microwave. For some reason, that doesn't happen. So yeah, having stock on hand and more steam things is a great trick for anything you're reheating.
Yeah.
Oatmeal, I put the recipe for, because I think traditionally we all think of oatmeal as being really disgusting. So I figured out a way to make it delicious, because I pretty much was eating it every day. Whether you add the sweetener or not is up to you. Another trick that I used to do instead of adding any sweetener is getting a really old ripe banana and chopping it up and adding it while it's cooking. That helps to add sweetness. So if you're looking to avoid that. And I think those blueberries really help the flavor, the color. It really just adds something to make it delicious. And I think the sea salt helps so much too with that.
Oh yeah, salt's huge.
It tastes totally different. And then with oatmeal, I think garnishing is key. Here you go.
I've done them where I'll
Thank
do
you.
like soak the steel cut oats, I guess, for like a day, and that next night I'll drain it and make a crock pot of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And people also do, like, now it's a thing, a very trendy thing to do overnight oats.
Yeah, I've always
with
heard about these. What are these?
I mean, it's
Put it
just
in the
kind of
fridge. Like with everything goes in the fridge instead of cooking it. Yeah.
and you just eat it. It's more like mushy
The next day?
cereal.
It goes overnight?
Yeah, I'm not into it, but a lot of people do it, and it's
Do
great.
you
It's
heat it
probably
up the
over.
next day?
No, it's like mushy
You could
cereal.
if you wanted.
You know what I tell people though? Instead of doing like, especially if you're watching out for the grains, do hemp hearts instead of the
Cool.
oatmeal.
I've never
That's a
tried
good
that.
idea.
That sounds
Yeah, that's
awesome.
good. Katie's been doing that lately. So she's been dumping. She's been making like we were like, let's do keto for a couple of weeks, and so she broke out her oatmeal, and I'm like, you can do that with hemp hearts and just throw it in like a cup of hemp hearts instead of doing that.
You
She
can
was
do
like,
it with
"What?"
like black rice. You can do for breakfast too. And if things are cooked left
Yeah.
over, and like my grains, I put a little bit of salt, but I don't season them like crazy until I'm finishing a dish.
Mhm.
So you can cook black rice with almond milk and then add all these garnishes that I mentioned, and that's really good too. Rethink
Never
all
even
of
thought
your
about
grains.
that.
You could have any grain for breakfast.
Yeah.
Because who's
Why not?
limiting you?
We also will do gluten-free oats instead of the steel cut.
Mhm.
I grind them up, and then I put sea salt, some frozen blueberries, and an egg, and those are our pancakes.
Cool.
Oh.
But
Yes,
they're
my
pretty.
sister
There's
just
no
told me about
sweetener.
that.
There's a little salt and a little vanilla, but that's it. There's no
And
no
they're
sugar,
delicious.
and they're
Okay.
so good.
Fruit is such a
Grind
good
them
trick,
down.
I think, for sweetening stuff up that doesn't necessarily. And
Yeah.
this is like a huge batch, so I don't like a little bit of maple syrup. I'm okay with because it's a dry.
Mhm.
I mean, hey, maple syrup is awesome.
Yes, it's delicious. Brown rice. Okay, I didn't like brown rice until I came across this recipe, and I think it's a particular combination of the two different types of rice, and it just being cooked perfectly. I think brown rice to a lot of people is just mushy and gross, but this is really toothsome. It has an amazing texture. The flavor of the rice comes through. It's really delicious. So that's why I shared it with you. And mastering the basics is a really big thing with cleaning too, because if you're having healthy foods deemed as bad, right? It tastes bad. But I think it's because you're putting together a lot of bad cooking in some instances. So you have to think of it as like, if you're taking time and care and flavor into every aspect of it, it's going to come out well. But if you're just kind of throwing it together, then of course. So like little things like overcooking your grains, yeah, it's probably going to ruin your bowl because it's just not good, or over seasoning it or whatever it may be. So I think mastering the basics is really important. That's why I shared this with you, because it comes out great. Same with quinoa. I think it's really important to cook it properly, but mastering the basics is going to help a lot with cleaning. Green smoothie I shared. I really like this because I think a lot of green smoothies are just bad. And this one is delicious, and it tastes good, and it doesn't even look green. It's bright pink and joyous, and I think it's a really great recipe, so just share that with you. You can substitute, like I said, a nut milk, and you can even use it for all the liquid versus just
You have sparked my
that is so great.
creativity. I'm going home. I've
That
got my
is
stuff. I'm
awesome,
gonna get all
because
this.
it's a little intimidating when you're like, I'm kind of already doing it. Like, I'm
I'm
it's
there.
not
I'm just-
overwhelming.
yeah, this is
So
like
yeah,
ninja.
I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah.
And then the stock recipe. So those are just the basics. I started an Instagram account that's just about food. And I
I was gonna
share a
ask
lot
where
of
else
these
can we find you?
messages, but also like I share a lot of pictures of bowls.
Okay.
Yeah, it's at the bottom there. Try clean eats. I do a ton of
Good name.
bowls, and I like to make them look pretty and have texture and different flavors.
That's what I want more information on.
Cool. Yes, and I share this. So every time
Yeah.
I post, I'm usually like sharing a recipe or just kind of a message about how to make it easier.
Beautiful.
And the other thing I'd add is I mentioned like my sister when she was diagnosed with Graves, the acupuncturist was like, you need to start eating meat. If she'd had this and had been eating this way for 10 years, it would have been different.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because like I can eyeball how many carbs are in something because of having given my son insulin. So I can tell
That's
you
not
this.
very normal.
Like on the front, the lima beans are about 5, and that rice is probably 30. And that's actually a really good carb amount for that healthy.
Yeah.
You can be vegetarian and not overeat carbs is my point.
Yeah, and like thinking
Right.
about, like you saw in the pictures, the bowls are put together. It's not like rice at the bottom and then like some veggies on top. That's why I like building it this way. Like I mix it all together and eat it. I don't keep it separate like that. But I like to build it that way because it's like all the healthy yumminess is there and you're keeping the portions in control. Like I have the same amount of rice as I do of 3 different types of veggies, like 3 times as many veggies. But it's just because I'm building it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm feeling like I don't have any variety in my food.
I hate that.
Yeah.
And that's what happens a lot with healthy eating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now I'll tell you this: when we first started eating clean, we heard paleo, and we're like burger meat and avocados and eggs and bacon. You know what I mean? Like we didn't know anything else. And my wife got an egg allergy, like right off the bat.
That's crazy.
Yeah, because I was just like pumping her full of eggs. Like she really does
Everything in
make.
moderation.
Oh, I know. She makes the perfect like what do you call it?
Soft veg.
Runny eggs, like
Over easy.
when you boil it, but it's over
Yeah,
easy.
that's soft poach. No,
Soft, yeah, poach. She did those,
That's
and I was
amazing.
just like crushing those.
Right, you put them on
runny
everything.
yolks on everything.
Yes,
And she
everything.
gets an egg allergy.
When I
But we
told
got
you
it
I
right.
did,
Normal.
yeah, I did too, but that's because in pregnancy I couldn't. Eggs were my go-to,
Yeah.
and it wasn't a carb. But I couldn't stomach meat, and like
How has Brayden not gotten an egg?
he eats a lot of eggs.
5 a day.
He might have one.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe he hasn't been as real. Yeah, so I'm really glad to hear it's got you inspired. And I think
Yeah,
that
this is
it's
even
starting
awesome.
with the basics. If you're not used to any, like, I don't know if you eat quinoa and stuff at first, it can just be, I just didn't like this stuff when I started. But you just start to incorporate a little more and a
I
little
have
more.
some of the Trader Joe, and it's okay. I just have to be careful with grains because it causes pain.
Oh, for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I
Any
mean,
kind of grain. I mean, not just gluten-free.
have you done soaking?
That's a big one.
Well, she mentioned that the almonds,
I do
if she
soak my
soaks,
almonds,
yeah,
but I haven't really done any soaking. or
So
rice or
I
anything
pretty
like
much
that.
soak almond grains. Quinoa is what I usually cheat on, but that's just because for me that's my easy go-to.
You soak
And
all your
it's not-
grains? Or
grains.
Grains, okay.
Like
Yeah, and
what?
it's not typically
What do
so
you soak?
brown rice. This recipe is soaked
you do?
overnight. Any type of like farro or wheat berry,
Mhm.
which it sounds like you should probably just avoid that. But I found, because we were doing this with our bowls, we always soaked when we were selling our food. People who have gluten sensitivity often will not react
Right.
the same to soaked grains.
Yep.
Mhm.
And so it's like starting the sprouting process and removing part of that,
Yep.
like there's phytic acid in most grains
Mhm.
and beans.
Mhm.
So there's a lot in it that's hard for your body to digest, but when it starts sprouting, it's kind of shedding that. And that's why you strain the
I
water.
haven't done
and
that.
Yeah.
I need to try
But
that.
That's
it can
huge.
help a lot.
It's
Is that
huge.
online?
I got a chart I can send to
yeah?
you. It's got
Cool,
everything.
yes. You want to send it to me?
Yeah. Give me
Always
the chart.
love more.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and you can soak it you should experiment with soaking it for even longer. The only thing you have to do in soaking longer is making sure you're changing out the water, because otherwise it literally will sprout and start to grow. And, but you can soak for 24 hours
I do that
or more.
anyway.
You can sprout anything and eat
Yeah.
it still. It's just about keeping the environment clean and doing it safely. But yeah, a lot of times people who have issues digesting grains, that helps. a lot.
Like sourdough bread was a breakthrough for me. It's so nice to be able to have that sometimes.
Yes.
Sourdough bread.
Yeah, I used to have like extreme gluten reaction
Yes.
to everything, and now I can have a high quality like pizza if I want it. If I really
Yeah,
search
When
it
I
out.
met my husband,
But
he
not
was
every
like,
day.
Yeah.
No.
It's you gotta.
My husband
a lot
was
of work.
completely intolerant to gluten when we met, and I was not eating healthy then, and I was like, this is impossible, like we can't eat together if you're allergic to gluten. But because I did like homemade pasta from scratch and got sourdough bread, he was able to start eating it, and he was fine. It was crazy after
Yeah.
not eating it for so long. It's really interesting.
Same like Kate was mentioning with milk. If you got a raw milk that's like A2, so it doesn't have the same
Casein. Yeah.
casein in it, proteins, then you're not gonna. I can have raw milk, and if I have like a pasteurized milk, it ain't happening.
That's crazy.
There's
Yeah.
a farm in Oxford that delivers it to Durham.
Cool.
Milk. right on.
I've got a place in Saxonhall too.
I'm sure you do.
And we have and next week we have a list of resources too of like all local places to get
Cool.
food.
One more thing too is there are places you can buy sprouted stuff. It's already sprouted. So in my picture of groceries, Trader Joe's did have a sprouted brown rice mix, but
Nice.
Whole Foods has a lot. So even in the bulk section, they'll have sprouted stuff. So that means it's already been soaked and
I
then
hadn't even
somehow
thought about
re-dried it.
Smart.
So yeah, that's
Okay.
a great, like, there are great shortcuts out there. You just have to start looking.
Hey, what
'cause
about,
even
like,
no idea.
legumes? Like, you want to sprout and soak legumes as well, but what about when you got a canned legume? Is that soaking? You know what I mean?
because it has to happen before. It's not
Yeah.
the cooking process.
I'm always wondering.
They already cooked it and canned it. You have to soak it before you cook it.
Oh, okay, wow.
And canned beans, like really, if you're not big in beans or you're just like add them because they're good for you, I think doing beans from scratch is like a game changer.
Yeah.
And it's really not that hard. It doesn't take a lot of time. I add seaweed to my beans when I cook them because it adds a lot of nutrition, but I always soak them and then it cuts down the cooking time too.
I used to do that.
Add the seaweed, and then another trick with beans is always season the pot at the end.
Really?
And I like to make it really salty because the beans soak it in, but then it's like a nutritious broth too.
Mm-hmm.
So I think with beans cooking from scratch, like they're so much better. I've been
I
buying
can't ever get them
canned
like.
beans.
I love. We used to have black eyed pea competitions in our house, like me and my brother, and my cousin, and just a bunch of butter and jalapenos. But I'd always soak mine overnight, and they were always using cans, and I couldn't compete with them because it's like maybe I didn't cook it long enough. Or I didn't soaking for 24, 36 hours.
I think it's about cooking it. I think that, because I think canned beans are awful now. I've been buying them because my daughter loves beans. And they're just, to me, they're always underdone and like chewy. But I get what you're saying. I think it's because they're in the liquid for so long.
Yeah.
So when you're testing them out, like you really want to make sure they're creamy and they don't have any bite left.
Yeah.
And then I turn the pot off and leave them in the liquid.
How long are you cooking your beans for?
It totally varies. So another thing that is a problem with beans is sometimes beans can be on the shelf for years,
Yeah.
and there's no way to determine how fresh a dried bean is.
Mm-hmm.
So like there are high quality producers that you can buy from. Like when we lived in Napa, there was a local guy and he did Rancho Gordo beans. So you can order them online and they're heirloom varieties. They're so cool and they're so good, but they are very true to like it's fresh dried beans. So they take way less time to cook.
Wow.
So there's really no way to tell you how long it's going to take to cook unless you know your
It's like
source.
I'm getting a meal ready, like say we did
Yes.
like a New Year's Day thing, and I'm like, we did it this year. We cooked them. We did the black eyed peas, and Katie had to end up throwing them out because she's like, I've been cooking these I cooked them for a
and that
day,
happens
cooked them for
sometimes.
12 hours or something, and just not happening.
Those
We
are
were
probably
pressure
just
cooking them.
really old beans. It
Yeah.
stinks. And that's
They
the
were
thing,
really old
too.
beans.
I always batch cook beans. Like I never cook beans a day because you don't know.
That's smart.
You don't know. And like it's so much better to just forget about it and not have the pressure of like dinner waiting on your beans. I've been there.
Been there many times.
But let them cool in the liquid. And then I also store them in the liquid. And like I said, it's that seasoned broth that starts to get inside the bean.
Yeah.
And it's really tasty and they're creamy. But I think it is about letting them cool and store in the liquid.
And then freeze them instead of refrigerate them.
Well, no, I refrigerate them if I know I'm going to eat them soon. But since I batch cook, I pretty much always just like when I'm done, I freeze.
Mhm.
7 days.
Yeah,
Most things you're gonna say, if I've cooked that and it's sitting in the refrigerator, I've got 7 days.
We cook on Sunday, and then if there's anything left on Sunday, which rarely happens, I do not eat it. But other than that, I consider it safe. But use your nose.
Yeah.
I mean,
My nose doesn't work.
the human body is pretty good at knowing like whether you're gonna eat like spoiled food.
Yeah. Give me a lot to think about.
I know, I eat a lot of lentils, like the lentil soups from like Amy's lentil soups. You need, supposed to be organic. It's organic.
So,
I assume they're
lentil-
organic. So
There's different types of
They're really
lentils,
good.
which take different amount of time to cook, and they're kind of like different processes as well. But red lentils are really easy to make fast, creamy soup, and it's like a no-brainer. So I don't know what's in Amy's, but oftentimes, even if it's
A lot of
organic, they're
vegetables
cheating you and adding some
lots of
But, like,
carrots and yeah.
red lentil soup. You can literally just like sweat some onions, add your lentils, season it with whatever, like if you have a curry,
Mm-hmm.
and then
Oh.
water. And then you can add like lemon juice and spinach at the end, and it's the best soup ever. It takes no time.
Yeah.
But I think the key is knowing that red lentils are those ones that they get creamy. They don't take a lot of time to cook. You don't even necessarily have to soak them. Whereas something like a black lentil is going to hold up better in like a salad that you're cooking them
Right.
properly. You're not starting to split, and then you.
I'll have to try that. And hopefully I'm not allergic to them.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for my
We'll
allergy
see.
test to come back and say
We'll
what I'm
see.
allergic to. So.
Yeah. But mung beans, I'll talk about next week too. I let mung beans sprout,
Yep.
and they're the grain, or I should say the bean I can always eat, even if my gut's in a bad place. But they're sprouting from the night before.
I need to try that
I'm
one.
doing
So
a
you just do 'em
Qatar this
overnight.
week. I gotta
Yeah.
do it again.
And you're
It
able
tastes
to
so
eat
good.
Mhm.
Scoop us.
I just emailed you both of their contact info,
Okay,
just so you have it.
Okay.
And then that way you guys have each other's. I
Yeah,
group
and
emailed. I hope that was
Yeah.
okay.
When we cooking dinner.
Nice to see you.
Thank
all.
you.
Nice to meet you.
See you later.
Thanks for coming, Karen. And I'll send you next week's
Okay.
unless you can make it.
Okay, that's good.
Oh, my sister's. Fabulous. What's wrong?
So, when are we having dinner?
Thank you.
But
Thank
having
you
it-
for.
let's do it for
I don't
sure.
know
Yeah,
what
no, I'm
happened.
saying like let's all get together and have
Let's
dinner.
plan it.
Yeah, I would love
All
to get in
right.
the kitchen with you and just like talk to you the whole time.